Too late. Okay, so we are now live. Welcome, everyone. This is the second debate between Joe Cienkowski and Scientia Perceptum. So we do have, there we go, we do have some people who are actually on Twitter who are getting this link and currently starting to sign on. As of this time, we do have 0 viewers, but the link did just go live. I have sent out both YouTube and Google Plus links. The one thing, Joe, that I mentioned last time I pointed to the mute button on the microphone, but I can hear the person in the background talking to you right now. So if you would not like other people to hear that, it probably would be good if you can use your mute button. If you
can hear him, right? Which is good.
I can hear him through.
Okay, good.
And
no, that's okay.
Okay. So we do currently have 13 viewers. We are live. So Joe, how would you like to start this? I know that last time we had this kind of format set up. One thing that I did hear from a lot of viewers is I actually preferred what we did at the very end, which was instead of having necessarily a time limit, we basically just had a free-flowing conversation. So I would leave that up to you, whichever way you'd like to do it.
Well, I guess we can switch a little bit. I mean, I have some questions. We can each do our opening.
Sure.
And I guess we can kind of play a little loose the way we did it with question and answering, and maybe interrupt each other on points of contention.
Great. And as I said, you know, I did get a lot of feedback that a lot of people actually enjoyed that format a lot better because they felt like there was a lot more information presented and it didn't limit us to a certain time limit. That we maybe weren't able to present our cases fully enough. One thing I would like to say is welcome everyone on Twitter. Viewers, I'm not sure who else is actually viewing this broadcast as well, but thank you for showing up. I know many of you have probably watched our previous debate. This is number 2. Where is the live chat, says Dean Martin. It should be in there. I do have a chat bar up, so if you're actually viewing the video, the chat bar should be up. I will go ahead and check it. It does look like it's up. And let me see if I can actually, yes, yeah. So the live chat is currently up. So what you'll have to do, Dean, is you will have to, if you're in Google Hangouts there, I believe you'll have to go along your left-hand side of the screen and make sure that you open the chat in your own browser. So that's for everyone, of course, watching as well. The chat in the browser is the best way to do that. If you actually along the left-hand side, the Google Hangouts bar will pop up, and then you can choose the chat button at the very top. And I hope that helps. And same thing, Duncan Weston. Okay, so Joe, would you like to go ahead with your introduction, since I believe I started last time?
Sure. Okay.
I will actually mute my mic during this so that there's no background noise.
Okay. Well, I would like to thank everybody for joining us. I think it's a very important topic that we're going to be discussing. If the flood is true, then everybody should pay attention and realize why the flood happened and the ramifications. Now, there is a deluge of evidence proving the flood. The scientific evidence is well documented, which I'll try to present a lot of it, but you have to look at the whole picture. Sometimes when you take an individual part and look at it, it may not look like it fits, but when you take the whole picture, you can see that it presents a clear picture. Now, there's a science to detective work. To detect means to discover the existence of. Now we can clearly determine that there was a flood conclusively with an investigation, just like any crime scene. If the Bible's flood version is true, what would we expect to find? If there was a worldwide flood, there would be worldwide evidence. Okay, now when this flood happened, the fountains of the deep broke open, as scriptures say. Layers of sediments were depositing rapidly, along with layers of living things that were buried and became fossilized. Sand, mud, and lime were all deposited rapidly by water in rock layers all over the earth. Trees were picked up and moved and settled in settlements. This cataclysmic event flooded the whole Earth's surface, stirring up for a year soil being deposited in enormous amounts of sediment and rapidly burying animals and forests, accounting for the fossils and oil deposits that we have today. As the water drained into lowing areas, enormous gorges and canyons were cut into the newly formed sedimentary rock, which now hardened. Now these are fault lines that we see, these fountains of the deep that broke open. They were subterranean water chambers or underground reservoirs. Now they've discovered geysers on Saturn's moon and water erupting into space from underground reservoirs through cracks in the moon's crust. So if this happened to the moon, there's no reason that we wouldn't think that it wouldn't be able to happen here. Oceans and continents formed when this happened. Mountains, as we see them today, formed where these tectonic plates collided and overlapped with each other. Fault lines appeared, separating and forming these tectonic plates. This movement in the lithosphere has created some of the most dramatic features that we see in the world today, such as mountain ranges, volcanoes, earthquakes, and even islands. Now, most of these occur near these tectonic plates. Now, science, first off, is observation. Now, what do we observe? Well, we see worldwide flood stories. Dr. Dwayne Gish says that there's over 270 such stories showing people carried this knowledge with them wherever they went. Now, a few could be, understood as maybe copying each other. But when you have this many, with many very similar stories, it lends credence that there was an actual flood, but the Bible's Bible's one is in context. Secondly, we see worldwide fault lines. These fault lines are across the whole world. These are scars in the Earth's crust where the ground broke open, releasing these water chambers. Now, if you look at a map of fault lines across the globe, it looks like a cracked egg when you look at the Earth. Thirdly, we see worldwide catastrophic damage everywhere. We see massive fossil graves. Now, wouldn't we expect to find billions of dead plants and animals buried and fossilized in sand, mud, and lime that were deposited rapidly in these rock layers? Of course. That's exactly what we find. We find extensive graveyards and exquisitely preserved fossils. We see the Grand Canyon, which shows no slow and gradual erosion. So it wasn't formed by a trickling Colorado River over millions of years. The Grand Canyon is a giant spillway. We've seen other spillways from floods, like the Spillway Canyon in Finland. They create canyons. A canyon, by definition, is a narrow chasm cut into the earth by running water. This is exactly what we see happen. We see worldwide polystrate trees. Now, these are trees that go through the strata that supposedly millions of years, which was concocted by Charles Lyell. This is like a giant stake through the heart of millions of years and evolution. Worldwide population. The hard scientific numbers fit perfectly with 8 people 4,400 years ago, as there was roughly 250 million people in Jesus' day, which, might be debatable. Now, this would be 2,400 years afterwards. Now, today we have 7.3 billion. So from today, just back to Jesus' day, it's 97% less humans in just over 2,000 years. Anybody can see that these numbers will bottom out in just a few thousand years into the BC. Now, 8 people 4,400 years ago fits perfectly, which also shows a younger universe and Earth's evolution, at the same time. So we also have worldwide oceans. The surface of the Earth has 70% water. This is water that came from the flood. We see a flooded universe. Now, we find some amazing things like we would expect. First of all, if there was a flood, the world would be totally different than the way it was. And we find in Chile, they found fossils of whales, like many of them, in pristine condition. Now, this is one of the hottest deserts in the world, yet we find fossils of whales there. A flood would fit that perfectly. We find sea creatures in rock layers that cover all the continents. And how can we find in the Himalayas, we find seashells and clams that are closed? Well, the reason they would be closed is because they died at once. Because as you know, clams open up when they die. We find frozen leaves in the Antarctica, showing that the vegetation used to be a lot different before then. Now, there's a reasonable explanation for anything that deals with the ark. The amount of animals in the world would fit, the size of the ark would fit them. We find biological reefs that are filled with marine life, which is something that we would expect. We see sandstone all throughout these rock layers. Now, sandstone is sedimentary rock formed by the consolidation and compaction of sand. Sedimentary means it contains sediment, which is material that settles to the bottom of a liquid. Now, if there was a flood, it would make sense that sediments would settle to the bottom, filled with marine life, filled with plant life, and that's exactly what we see. There's many other things we see, like these curved rock formations, which would be explained, by the flood with the lava coming up through where these tectonic plates split. The fossil record, I think when you look at the whole picture, we can see that the flood was a real event that happened. And if it's true, everybody better make sure they have their relation with God right. So I'll leave it at there for now.
Okay, Joe, thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind as well muting your mic while I make my intro, just to get rid of all the background noise there. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I can still hear you.
You can still hear me. Is that better?
Nope, still hear you.
Still hear you.
The easiest thing to do, Joe, is if you move your mouse to the top of this screen that you're actually looking at where you see yourself. If you move your mouse to the very top, you'll see a mic button. Just click on that and it'll mute. Perfect. Okay. So To start out, thank you again for coming. Thank you for everyone being here. We do have 17 viewers. If anyone can actually assist me in getting the chat open to everyone, that'd be great. I've tried a few things and I don't seem to be able to get it going. If not, just follow along on Twitter, and I think we can kind of use that as the chat right now until we get a proxy put in. If anyone out there would like to actually start a chat hangout, then we can actually link that as well. That might help me, so I'm not doing all the administrative stuff. So the first thing that I think that we need to start out with is, I'm not going to go necessarily into what science is, but I am going to say a few things about how science works and what we know about the world around us based off of scientific exploration. So the first thing, Joe, is your introduction. You made a lot of claims there. Of course, there was no actual evidence presented, and I hope that we get to that during our discussion. Because again, this was, where we were going to actually present evidence. So everything you made were great claims, which I'm hoping you're going to actually be able to present support for those claims. So first of all, science is something known as a consilience. Basically, what that means is that it really doesn't matter what field of science we are talking about, they all support one another. So they are all taking different evidence from different observations. And all of this evidence from these different observations all match each other once you start to look at specific evidence that relates to that field of science. So it doesn't matter if we're talking about psychology or physics, geology or chemistry, sociology, linguistics. And I could keep listing every field of science all the way down to fields like medicine. Each one of these makes observations, and it brings in evidence that is independent of other fields. So basically, the best example that we can present, which is one that I often present on Twitter, is the fact that you have this field known as genetics. And genetics is basically the study of chemistry. It's the study of the chemistry that makes up life. And those are, of course, the chemical signatures that we find in chromosomes, which are collections of DNA. These chemical signatures, when we compare them to one another, these show us relationships. And of course, this is how you do things as paternity tests, to see if you want to go on the Jerry Springer show and find out if you have fathered a child, if you didn't know it, and they'll pay for it and get that paternity test for free, of course. And so you will actually start to see, using those chemical signatures, you can see the relationship between different people, and we can expand that all the way to different organisms. And using those chemical signatures, that DNA, we can build what's called a phylogeny, which is basically a tree of life. That, again, is one set of evidence that is independent from other sets of evidence. We could build the same phylogeny of how human populations have spread over the earth since Homo sapiens evolved, and we could build that using linguistics. And that linguistics would match the actual archaeological evidence that we find of humans moving out of Africa and over the countries, last arriving in the Americas and some island nations in the Pacific. That would be another phylogeny. And then, of course, the phylogeny that matches, and there's all these other phylogenies we can build. The phylogeny, of course, that matches DNA, which is what became known as the Neo-Darwinian synthesis, was the matching of the phylogenies built up by paleontology. Now, paleontology is not the study of chemistry, it is the study of basically geology. It's the study of looking at layers of strata, and we date the layers of strata using a whole separate field, which would be physics. And when you actually take these fossils, and again, we can know the dates from radioactive elements, and then of course there's the law of superposition that says that the ones on top are younger. As you go down through the strata, those layers get older and older and older. But of course, then when you actually radiometrically date them, you get what's called an absolute date, where that layers upon layers upon layers as relative dating. But here's the thing, is that when we actually take those fossils and we construct them based off of another field of science, which is morphology, which is basically looking at the anatomy of creatures, we can build another phylogeny. The interesting thing about that fossil phylogeny that we build, it almost exactly matches the genetic phylogeny. This is something that we ended our last debate with when I was talking about what is more similar on the Earth to a human in morphology, behavior, and genetics than anything else except for a chimpanzee. Of course, there's nothing. And then you do the next step and you go down and you look at gorillas, and then you look at orangutans, and then you look at gibbons, and you keep going down that list. Well, again, when we look at all living organisms nowadays and some of the things that are no longer alive that we can actually extract DNA from, and you compare that chemical phylogeny, the genetics, to the fossil phylogeny, they match each other. And this, again, is that consilience. We are basically taking different fields of evidence, different observations, and in science, when they match together like that, that is what builds an extremely strong theory. So that is one piece of evidence. And of course, along with that, you'll notice that I did get into geology. So basically, when you're looking at the geology, the structure of these layers, which have been laid down by processes that we know as the rock cycle. And the Grand Canyon, of course, is one that we can definitely go into, and we can go into other places on Earth. But again, if you look down at these layers, you'll notice excuse me, that they're all built up in different ways. So then what we would actually have to do, and this is where we actually are getting to, hopefully, where you present some of this evidence for the claims that you just made, we would have to actually look at the hypothesis that you are presenting. Basically, what the hypothesis is, and this is going back to what we've been talking about on Twitter, is that you have made a claim. Your claim is that there has been a worldwide flood that happened around 2348 BC. And again, that's according to the Usher chronology, which he took all the begats and all the dates of people in scripture, and he laid out a date which, again, most young Earth creationists use. So from Ham to Hovind to Gish to others, they use this Usher chronology and give the date of 2348 BC to when the actual date of the flood occurred. So that's the start of the hypothesis. We have that date. The next part of that hypothesis that we have to test, and of course the dating we can get into in many different ways, but the next part of that hypothesis we have to test is, of course, if you have a worldwide flood, then you would expect to see only one type of worldwide layer, and that layer would be all marine in origin. So basically, every single layer that we see on the Earth should all be marine sediments, and that's it. There shouldn't be anything else. Because, of course, at that time, according to the flood hypothesis, the Noachian Flood hypothesis, you would have nothing but salt water. So freshwater mixing, getting the salt water, which may not be the same dilution of salt that we find in oceans nowadays, but that's something else that you might need to present evidence for. We would again expect to see a worldwide ocean. And of course, when you have a body of water that is that large, the first thing that's going to happen when you first mix up those sediments for those 40 days and 40 nights, which again, the scripture claims, again, putting this scriptural analysis into a flood hypothesis that we can test with evidence, you would expect those 40 days and 40 nights are the time at which all of the sediments are first mixed up and then being laid down. Now, of course, if you take a bottle of water or a jar and you fill it up with just random sediment that you get from your yard and you mix it up really thoroughly and you put it down, what will happen is you will get a layering effect that occurs by how dense the materials are and how quickly they settle from that mixed up column. So again, according to the flood hypothesis, not only should every layer on the Earth that we observe that has not been laid down in the last 4,000 years, every layer on the Earth, besides being marine, should be sorted by density. So basically, you should get all the big boulders and rocks on the bottom, And then you start to get cobblestone, and then you start to get gravel, and then on top of that you start to get sand, and then on top of that you start to get some silt, and then on top of that you get the very finest things, which is basically the clay sitting out of the water. So basically, according to the flood hypothesis again, that we are going to be testing with the evidence which you present, every layer on Earth should see this exact same pattern. Of course, the other thing about this flood hypothesis is what happens to all the organisms that were alive at that time. And of course, what should happen at that point is that you basically get a mixture of all of these organisms together, and that's it. So there shouldn't be any kind of pattern to the way organisms are sorted. You should find rabbits in the Cambrian along with humans in the Cambrian rocks that we see. You should find trilobites up here at the surface right now of the very basically highest rocks, the youngest rocks, if we're talking about that law of superposition again, which we'll go back to relative versus absolute dating a little bit later, I'm sure. But again, according to this flood hypothesis, you should find organisms of every single thing in the fossil record mixed randomly throughout. So these are all things that we are going to be testing. And hopefully you will be presenting evidence for. Now, the last thing that we kind of need to go over is, again, which is something that I presented during the last debate, is the actual origin of what we currently know as young Earth creationism. So basically, before the early 1900s, young Earth creationism did not exist. At that point, you basically had day, age, and gap theories. And at that time, most people who followed scripture did not accept all of those stories necessarily as being literal. Day, age creationism, of course, saying that there were long days. And that was matching what some of the modern, at that time, geologists were pointing out, that it takes a long period of time based off of what we currently know to lay down the sediments. And these sediments are all mixed together. You find a marine layer, and then you find a layer in an estuary, and then you maybe find a layer on top of that that is only formed on land, which is called aeolian layers. On top of that, you might find a biological marine layer, basically a marine layer that can only be laid down by life, which takes certain minerals and elements from the water and creates this biological layer. And there's many types of these biological layers. Chalk is one. Chalk is basically these very small organisms that have skeletons that build up over time. And we know the rate at which those little skeletons build up to form those chalk layers. You have fossilized reefs, like you do around the New Mexico and Texas Panhandle. So you have the Guadalupe mountain range, which extends up into Mexico. The most famous instance of this, is, of course, is Carlsbad Caverns. These are fossilized reefs. You have other biological layers that can be formed in this way. And then, of course, you might get a lava flow or an ash storm on top of that, which will allow us to do radiometric dating. And then again, you'll have another marine layer, another layer of biological, another layer of aeolian. That's what we observe, which of course has to be then tested against this flood hypothesis that I just brought up, that you have to somehow present evidence for. So that was where Charles Lyell, James Hutton, other of the fathers of modern geology were starting from, and they were saying, this is what we observe based off of what we know about current rates. This is what we know based off of how sediments form. And then what, of course, occurred is that you started to get this young Earth creationist movement, which first started out, again, by Mary Ellen White, basically the leader of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, saying that she actually had a revelation where she was taken back in time and shown the actual six-day creation event by Jesus himself. So she actually observed in real time the six-day creation event. She did not actually espouse this herself. She had a follower called George McCready Price, who would tour the country. Basically, he would have these church revivals inside tents. He was kind of one of the original people to really do that. And he was the one who was spreading this word. And he also would kind of integrate his knowledge of science into this, into what he thought was this revelation that Mary Ellen White had. So he was espousing basically, no, these are not allegories. These were actual events, and here's the six-day creation. And from that, from George McCready Price going around and basically gaining new followers of this new movement that had never existed before, we had Morris and, oh boy, my memory is escaping me. We had Morris, who was one of the writers of a book called The Genesis Flood in the early 1960s. And so basically what we now call young Earth creationism started out as flood geology, because that's what they were trying to do. They're basically saying that, no, this was not some kind of event that was just an allegory. It was actually a real event, because up until that time, it wasn't really accepted as such. And you had these day creationists going on. So that is basically the birth of the modern young Earth creationist movement. It started as flood geology, and since then has very much expanded, mainly in the United States until recently. So that being said, there is, I guess, now the opportunity for you to start presenting what you think is your evidence for an actual young Earth, some of the things that you brought up in your introduction.
Well, where do I start to contradict you? Let me first start off by saying the young Earth creationist that you're saying was started recently. I mean, the Bible, Genesis, was written 3,500 years ago, and people believed in the 7-day creation before then. As long as the Bible's been around, people have been believing in a young Earth. And I think today, now more than ever, we see the evidence for a young Earth is there. The geologic column, which Lyell presented in the 1800s, there was no evidence at all for old ages back then. Now, he was building upon Thomas Hutton for uniformitarianism, and it was, he had no evidence for his geologic column. So his whole idea of millions and billions of years was totally concocted, and it went totally against, naturally, what Scripture says, but he had no evidence for that at all.
You are going to present evidence for this, correct?
I've already shown some evidence, and I'll elaborate more.
Great. So I also would look.
How is it the human population?
Would like some citations as well. So
okay,
that's one thing that people were on Twitter were asking.
There's hard numbers. There's hard numbers like the human population.
Well,
that's evidence to me. The worldwide.
Okay, instead of getting into a little bit of a gish gallop, let's actually go back to where you just started from. So first of all, my what I was relating about young Earth creationism is history. Who I will cite on that is one of the most renowned writers about this topic. His name is Ronald Numbers.
It doesn't matter what you're writing. It doesn't matter who you're citing. It doesn't matter because we have the scriptures that have been around way longer than the people who you're citing. And it says 7 days much longer than you're trying to say.
But talking about
you're going against what's known history and trying to say, well, this person said it in when did this person? I mean, the Bible's been around for
I'm not talking about
much longer than that.
I'm not talking about
where
the Bible.
people believe young Earth creation.
Well, no, I'm actually talking about the history of young Earth creationism and how the movement started. So that's what I was starting to address because that's what you just started with. So again, who I will cite is a well-known historian. His name is Ronald Numbers. He wrote a book called The Creationists. This is very well documented. So what I was telling you about the Seventh-day Adventist Church, Mary Ellen White and her revelation, along with George McCready Price and Whitcomb and Morris, who wrote the Genesis Flood, that is well documented. That is not in dispute. Now, I know what you're saying about Scripture, but I'm just giving you the history of
believed in the young Earth creation a long time ago.
Okay,
for you to say it just for you to say it just started, I mean, it's been believed for a long time. I don't know. Maybe it became more popularized with what you're saying. But the fact is that the Jews who got the revelation from God, they believed in a young Earth. I mean, I don't know how. I understand what you're saying, but I don't think the facts. I don't think the facts match it. Let me ask you: when Charles Lyell did his Geological, did he have any evidence at all of millions and billions of years?
Well, I don't know. Here's what I would like you to do then. If you are claiming that that's what Charles Lyell said, where are you getting this information?
It had to be. It had
No,
to be. If the flood,
well,
they have
again,
all the layers, all the time periods involved. I've seen the Jurassic, all the time periods that they say. They're obviously, say, 200, 300 million, and have, these fossils, which many times they had fossils that dated the rocks that dated the fossils, and the fossils that dated the rocks with the circular reasoning. But of course, it's the geologic column is supposed to show millions of years.
Okay, so let's go on to that next step there. So again, Hutton and Lyell, one thing they based it off of, and you brought this up, is uniformitarianism. Basically, the processes that we see actually occurring today are something that we can extrapolate into the past. So that is basically the basis of that. That does not discount catastrophic events from occurring, of course, because we do know that catastrophic events occur on a very regular basis. If you live anywhere near the East Coast, of course, you have hurricanes. There are floods that happen on a regular basis. There are hurricanes. So basically, there are all these possibilities of large events occurring. And of course, those happen periodically. Part of that periodicity, of course, would be even meteor strikes. Going back to Charles and Lyell, though, and Charles Lyell and James Hutton, is what they were saying is basically, and they really didn't go into billions of years because they were studying the actual structures that they had at that time to observe.
Hundreds of millions.
The stratigraphic structures that they had to observe at the time. And so what they
hundreds of millions.
And so what they said is that, yes, we can actually observe nowadays how long it takes for certain sediments to be laid down. And particular sediments are laid down in different ways, so some take longer than others. Of course, one of the things we know is that, and I pointed this out when I brought up me asking you to actually provide evidence for your flood hypothesis I presented, one of the things that we know is that the denser, basically the heavier the sediment is, the longer it will take to settle out of a fluid. And of course, a fluid is either a liquid or a gas. So you can either have dust settling out of the air, whereas if in a windstorm, the sand will settle much quicker. If you're talking about in water, of course, that dust is what settles out very slowly, whereas the sand will settle out very quickly. So sandstone formations can build up much quicker than, say, siltstone formations or claystone type formations like shale. So they were basing them off of actual real observations of events that were occurring right in front of them, and then extrapolating how long it would take for those sediments to build up based off of what they are currently observing. So that's the first thing. The second thing to bring up real quick before we go on with this line of reasoning, because this is a single line of reasoning I think we should really talk about, because most of your argument does appear to hinge on this. Again, going back to the origins of young Earth creationism in the 1960s as flood geology is, of course, the concept that the fossils take the rocks and the rocks take the fossils, which you just parroted, kind of a well-known Gish parody. Of course, this is not
a fact. I've seen it in textbooks. They for a long time they've said that.
And of course, you would have to present the textbooks in front of me so we could actually talk about what is actually said in the textbooks. But instead of actually presenting hearsay, I think what we should point out is, of course, this is a well-known straw man, and the reason it is because what I already presented in my introduction, which is you have a difference between what is called relative dating and absolute dating. First of all, we know that sediments are laid down due to gravity. desert file I could get on and say, gravity! But here's the thing, is that, you know, sediments are laid down due to gravity. That's when we look at that's why when we look at stratigraphic layers, they basically all follow the curvature of the Earth, because they're being laid down either by, again, these fluid dynamics, either being sediments falling out of the air or falling through a water column. And as these sediments lay down, of course, the older one's going to be on the bottom. The younger ones will progressively build up on top of them. Now, that is known as the law of superposition. It is not in dispute. And that is one way which we date how old certain things are. But again, that is relative. That is basically saying that relative to me, you are living in a place that is very far southwest of me. That's a relative position. So the way that this works with stratigraphic layers, of course, is the older, the ones that are farther down are relatively older than the ones on top of them. And then this strata way up here is relatively younger, in fact, a lot relatively younger, based off of what we know from uniformitarian principles of how long it takes certain sediments to be laid down, the compaction rates, deposition, all those things in the rock cycle, in the sedimentary part of the rock cycle, that these ones up here are extremely young compared to these ones that are way down here, for example, in the Grand Canyon. Now, that is relative dating, but that is different than absolute dating. And this is where I was going into consilience. So basically, yes, we do know that as you build up, and I'm sure you wouldn't disagree with this, as you go up a geological column, the rocks get younger and younger and younger and younger as you go up. Now, every once in a while...
I disagree with it. I disagree.
Okay, so then I would love to hear your presenting evidence of why you don't think as you go up a geological column, the rocks get younger, younger, and younger. So we'll get to that in a second. But here's the interesting thing about that whole geological column is that every once in a while you do get an igneous rock that is actually in that geological column. It could be a lava flow. It could be an ash storm. It could be just a dike. And that's kind of the most interesting thing, is through the geological column of these different sedimentary layers that are being laid down, this happens in the Grand Canyon all the time, you will actually get a dike of igneous rock that comes up through it. That actually will get eroded off, and so that igneous dike will stop at some point. And again, you have these other maybe lava layers or ash layers, and that is a different type of dating that we use for those things, and that's called relative dating. That actually gets to radioactive decay and the known half-lives, which again are not in dispute, the known half-lives of certain isotopes. And again, the thing about the isotopes, and then I'll let you go, the thing about the isotopes is that every isotope has a different half-life, but yet when you look at a number of different isotopes in a single sample, they all point to being basically having the same amount of decay occurring. So even though uranium and thorium and potassium might decay at different known half-lives, when you look at all of the daughter elements off of that one parent isotope, they will all fall into a known pattern that all match each other. So they would all date being the same age, which should be statistically impossible, by the way. I mean, that shouldn't occur. If radiometric dating does not work, then what you would expect to find is that none of the isotopes would match each other. All of their half-lives, even though being different, which we can measure in real time, we can actually see it, all those different isotopes should not all show the same date. That should be physically impossible as far as our knowledge of how physics works.
Okay. Well, let's go over these layers that you are speaking about. One, we see, as I showed the in Finland, the canyon that they have there was from a spillway, and I also mentioned about
what canyon is this in Finland? Where is it at?
Let's see. It's called the. Give me 1 second here. Thing. Let's see. Give me 1 second. Okay, it's the Spillway Canyon in Finland. which is from a flood.
And where is it at?
It's in Finland.
Yeah, I know where in Finland. I mean, come on, Finland.
I'm not
is a big
exactly
nation.
sure.
Okay, but this is, again, Joe, you agreed to present evidence. So what I'm looking for is spillway, is it just a common name for a place where water flows over? So spillway canyon could be anything. So where specifically
I'm saying that we've
and what is
seen,
the actual name?
I'm saying that we have seen canyons form from floods on
Yes, that is
smaller
your,
levels. The Grand Canyon we see with there's no erosion between the layers, shows that it couldn't have happened over millions of years.
no, that's actually not true.
As you suggest.
But can you present, since you just made this another claim, so since you can't actually bring up the evidence about a canyon in Finland, you can't give the name or location or any geological evidence about it, let's go back to the Grand Canyon, since you just brought that up. That is someplace that everyone knows, and you just made the claim that there's no erosion layers found anywhere in the Grand Canyon?
No, none that can be readily noticeable for sure. You see very clean edges.
No, you don't, except for, of course, what is known as the Great Unconformity. So right below what is, I believe, called the Tono Formation, which includes the Tweep Sandstone and some other layers, which is basically kind of at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, you have something called the Great Unconformity. And what the Great Unconformity is, it is Precambrian, I believe, schists, which are metamorphic rocks, and all those metamorphic rocks are aligned like this. And then what you see is they are eroded off, and where you go and look at them in different places, that Vishnu schist is eroded off in different ways, so it's all jagged. So that, but again, those schists are laid down like this. And then on top of them, you start to get sandstones and limestones and siltstones. So there's one example, and this is just one I can bring up, because I can bring up in the Grand Canyon.
Well, this is, hold on for a second. Hold on, let me, the stuff that we see, everything that you mentioned, silt, sandstone, the reefs, everything can be explained by the flood. I mean, well, I mean, you're giving your opinion, which
no, I'm not. Well, here's the thing: is I'm actually going to present evidence, but that's what I'm looking for you.
I don't see any real evidence. You're saying that you're saying the same things I'm saying, but you're saying that.
No, but I can actually present evidence, which I'm going to do in a second.
But we don't see any erosion between there, so you can say it all you want.
I can say it, and I can actually show it to you right now.
We find billions of marine fossils inside these layers.
Okay, but now you're shifting to a different subject.
That would make sense that there was a worldwide flood.
Shifting to a different subject, I think we're going to stop and go to this claim that you just made, and we're going to give our evidence for this claim. You just claimed that there is actually no erosion layers in the Grand Canyon at all. Is that correct?
Yes. I mean, if you're going to find a part that happened, maybe a certain part happened where there was erosion after the flood, but generally speaking, when you look at the Grand Canyon as a whole, it goes from one layer with either fast, but you see no erosion layers at all. Are you looking at something different than I see?
Well, I'm looking at reality, if that's what you're commenting on, so I'll actually show you this. So this right here is something known as the Grand Staircase. I will blow it up a bit because I know it is kind of small at this point, so I will make it larger. The Grand Staircase extends across many states. The very bottom part that you see there, right here, where my cursor is moving around, this is what I was just talking about. These are the Precambrian rocks. This is known as the Vishnu schist. And the Vishnu schist is, I'll make sure I'm presenting this to everyone. Present to everyone, yes. There we go. So the Vishnu schist, again, right down here where the Colorado River cuts through the Grand Canyon, this Vishnu schist, as you can see, is layered like this. And of course, due to gravity, it would not be layered like that. And so what that means is that this Vishnu schist was turned kind of on edge, and then it was eroded away right here, which you see is what I was talking about, the Tonto group with a Tapete sandstone at the very bottom. So there's one erosion layer. I will point out another. If you go up a little bit, you get to the Supai group right here. And in the Supai group, one of the formations right above it, or I'm sorry, right below it, is called the Surprise Canyon Formation. The Surprise Canyon Formation is something known as karst geology. And karst geology is when you have a biological layer that has been laid down. That biological layer in this case is actually limestone. Limestone is caused by little microorganisms that get laid down. And then what happens to the limestone is the limestone actually gets eroded. The first thing that usually happens is you get sinkholes. One of the last things that you have happen is you have these famous karst formations like in China, where you have basically kind of these big pillars. But that right there, that Surprise Canyon Formation, is another example of erosion occurring. And then again, the Supai group is laid down on top of it. So we'll blow up that area just a little bit so you can see a little bit better. So there we go. So again, here is the great unconformity. It's called that because, again, all of these layers were laid down, then they were tilted on their side, as you can see here. And then what happens is you can see that it is not a straight line, because that has all been eroded away. And then other things have been laid down on top of it. This, again, Tonto group, starting with the Tweep sandstone, and then laid on top of the sandstone is shale, and then laid on top of the shale is a limestone, which, again, limestone is biologic in formation. It is not just a mineral formation. So that's the first thing, that what you were just saying about there being no erosion, erosion layers is incorrect, because what you were just saying is that there should only be erosion layers found basically at the very top sediments due to the flood. But again, looking at this, we find in reality that that is not true.
I've seen, I've seen a lot of parts of the Grand Canyon, and I don't see the erosion parts that you're
okay, that is called an argument from incredulity and ignorance.
Well, I see a bias on your part for a naturalistic
okay, everyone,
explanation. I see sandstone formations, limestone. We see fossil reefs, igneous rocks. You act like the igneous rocks wouldn't, somehow it's a different time period when it would fit perfectly within the flood, when these tectonic plates split apart, which caused all the earthquakes that we have in the world today, caused all the mountain ranges. The mountain ranges and earthquakes that we have are a result of this flood, and you would expect to find magma or igneous rocks, as once when the divergent tectonic plates, you have the magma that comes up. So we would expect to see magma in this. What I'm seeing here is a lot of geologic sorting. I see geologic sorting would explain everything we see here. All your Cretaceous, Paleocene, all these time periods were concocted by Charles Lyell and those who, need millions of years to, support their atheistic philosophy. But really, when you have, which we didn't talk about polystrate trees yet, this links everything to one event and shows that everything happened at once, which is a giant stake through the heart of evolution and a young Earth, or an old Earth. It proves that this all happened at once.
Everything that you just said is a claim again.
It's your starting point.
Everything that you're
making a claim to. You're showing this and saying, well, this happened over millions of years.
I never actually said that.
I see this same thing that you're looking at and say it happened from a flood that caused the Grand Canyon. Just like any other spillway, this is one of biblical proportions. We've seen it happen other places. And I I say that it fits perfectly with, what I'm saying.
Actually, I never said this happened over billions of years. So please don't try to put words in my mouth. What I am pointing out here is that these are all different formations. And I was going back to your original claim, which you said that there was no erosion occurring, which I just showed actually erosion has occurred. Again, we have the Great Unconformity and we have the Tonto Formation. So going back down to that, so you can see that on this illustration again. So here we go, Great Unconformity, which is this line right here between the Vishnu schist and the Tonto group here. And the first thing laid down is the Tweep sandstone. That is an erosion layer. Going up just a little bit here, again, we get the Surprise Canyon Formation, which is a limestone which caused a karst geology. And that, again, there is under right there. Now, just looking at this illustration that I'm showing you right here, you will notice that some of these groups don't actually give you the type of sedimentary rock that they are, but many do. So you have limestone, you have sandstone formation here, you have the Hermit Shale Formation. Right above that, you have the Coconico sandstone. Now, the most interesting thing about the Coconico sandstone is it is fossilized sand dunes that really don't show much water at all, because again, fossilized sand dunes. If you go right above that, you get the Kaibab Formation, and then you get into this area called this Chocolate Cliffs area, and the first thing that happens is another unconformity where you have an erosion layer that basically occurs right above that Kaibab Formation. So here we have what I was saying, that a flood hypothesis is basically the prediction is being refuted. Again, all of these layers that you see on this illustration of the grand staircase, they should all be marine layers according to a flood hypothesis, and all of the very large stuff should be at the bottom, all the very fine stuff should be at the top, because the mixing only occurred in the first 40 days according to the flood hypothesis. But that is not what we see. And again, what we see mixed in here is, I
think you're starting you're starting from a bias, first of all. If there was
again,
a worldwide flood, there wouldn't always be the same order you see everywhere. I mean,
you just made a claim of bias, which again is a claim that you have not shown. So
I'm doing the same claim of bias here. You're doing the exact same thing.
I'm hoping that you were actually going to present evidence for what you're claiming right now.
Well, I mean, we look at it. It all depends on your starting point. You're starting from everything is naturalistic, so you have to explain it over millions of years, because obviously if it happened quickly, evolution and looks silly.
I'm just looking at this one illustration here. This is the only thing that we're looking at right now. We're just looking at the grand staircase. Again, we know what these layers are made of. Or do you disagree with that? Do you disagree that some of these layers are made of sandstone that only happen in freshwater areas?
I agree. I see no reason to not believe what you're saying. But
okay, so stopping there. So stopping there, you are going to claim then, which is what I pointed out according to your flood hypothesis, you are going to claim that every single layer that you see here in this grand staircase, from the very top, which is the Pink Cliffs and Bryce Canyon, all the way down to the very bottom above the great the unconformity here, the grand unconformity, you're going to say that every single one of these layers that you see here was all formed by one flood, right? That's what your flood hypothesis claims. Are you agreeing with me?
Yes. I mean, if there's a couple layers that happened afterwards, I wouldn't doubt that happened, but certainly a majority of the layers that you're showing happened simultaneously. Okay,
so that is your claim, which I'm still waiting for evidence to support. But before you try to support your evidence, again, I will point out that one of the most famous formations here, and part of it is because what it is and how far it extends. This is just one cross section. There's many places where these layers are exposed. But going to this formation right here, the Coconico sandstone, this formation, which you claim that all of these layers were formed in one marine flood, this formation of Coconico sandstone is fossilized sand dunes, basically sand that is blowing around. I mean, there are other layers in this grand staircase. They're aeolian in origin, aeolian meaning that they are only
formed by wind. They're only formed in air. But focusing on the Coconico sandstone,
If this
because
is
how
a
famous it
layer,
is.
why wouldn't there be sand like this if there was a flood? And
It's a sand dune. It's a sand dune in a desert that has been fossilized.
well, I'm saying that why wouldn't we expect to see different types of sand from different places?
Because you're claiming that,
It would
that
be-
all of these layers were underwater from one worldwide flood.
Well, I mean, there's always a possibility that that there was local floods caused certain things under certain conditions in different places.
Yet
But
another
that
another
doesn't-
claim that you have not supported. This is yet
I'm
another
only
claim that
saying what you
which
said
you've given
last
no
time.
support for.
You're the one that said, that there was a lot of local floods
No,
in our last debate, and I'm saying
Wait a
that
second.
maybe if there was one, and you can show an instance, it doesn't negate the fact that many.
Wait a second, Joe. You are supposed to be supporting your claim that all of these layers are laid down by one approximately year-long flood that covered the entire Earth for a whole year, and that the water was only the source for this flood was water that only occurred during a 40-day time period. So again, you just said that, and you agreed with me that your claim is basically saying that every single layer that we have here in this grand staircase, which can extend across many states, one way to actually point this out, well, that's not the right one. We could get to that later. Here's another representation of it. So here's our grand staircase here. The grand staircase basically goes from, there we go, from the California border over here, goes all the way through Arizona, and here's the Grand Canyon again. Again, we have this big buckle here, which maybe you try to explain later. But, again, part of this grand staircase here is the fact that, again, we have that Coconico sandstone. So, so getting back to that Coconico sandstone, you are claiming that all of these layers that we see in this grand staircase right here are all formed by 1 year-long flood, where the water that was supplied for this flood occurred over 40 days. There should be sorting based off of density, but right in the middle of it, in fact, even like two-thirds of the way down, if we're looking at relative dating, is the Coconico sandstone, which is a fossilized desert sand dune. So how are you then, knowing, or do you not accept that the Coconico sandstones are a fossilized sand dune, which then hopefully you would present evidence why you do not think that it is such? How do you explain that you have fossilized sand dunes when all of these layers should be laid down in an ocean, in a worldwide ocean?
Well, it was, I'll have to study on these Cocosino sandstones that you're talking about, but I will say that a giant flood would incorporate things from everywhere. I mean, if there was
So you're
rushing
saying
water,
that one worldwide flood would have sand dunes from a desert incorporated in them?
why wouldn't it? Why wouldn't
Because
why
sand
wouldn't it have
dunes in the
any
desert
part of anywhere in the
aren't
world?
underwater.
I wouldn't have any part in the world that could be washed in there in a certain. It's
a desert sand dune is going to form underwater.
we have whale fossils that they found at the Academa desert in Chile. I mean,
Well, that's a totally different subject. I'm asking you about sand dunes in a desert forming underwater.
You find some off things like that, and if this is just something that happened, during the flood, I would believe it. I don't think that I'll study more on this Cocosino, but it doesn't seem to matter.
Coconico.
Coconino, it looks like.
Okay, so just to clarify, you're claiming that a fossilized desert sand dune is going to form underneath the ocean.
Look, I'll study
underneath the worldwide ocean.
I will study that, and I don't see it making any much of a difference, because I don't see why you wouldn't find everything. If there was a worldwide flood, and any part of the world would be washing around, and it could be these, sand dunes in one area that
The sand dune is going to form underwater. A desert sand dune is going to form underwater. I just want to kind of stick with that point. I just want you to say that you were claiming that a desert sand dune is going to form underwater during a flood.
I'm saying that something could have happened before that.
Oh, but you're saying that you just claimed that all of these layers occurred in one year-long flood.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I'm going to stick with that. I don't see you're compelling. I don't see it compelling, but I will.
Another argument from ignorance and incredulity, but please do.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's many things that you won't be able to explain and be incredulous to. You're incredulous that that there was a flood to begin with.
No, I'm actually presenting evidence supporting that there was not a flood. I'm not incredulous to it because you haven't presented evidence yet to back up your claim that there was one.
I've presented evidence, but you don't accept what
evidence
around the world.
So okay, so go ahead. Let's switch to another topic. Present one piece of evidence that you think supports your year-long worldwide flood where the supply of water happened over 40 days.
I think one of the most compelling, and there's many, is the world population. We have 7.3 billion people in the world today. In the year 1804 was when the population first topped 1 billion. In Jesus' day, 0 AD, there was an estimated 250 million people in the world. First, let me ask you, do you agree with that number, that there was about 250 million people in the world in Jesus' day?
That's your claim.
Before I go on.
That's your claim. I'm awaiting.
Do you agree or disagree?
That is your claim. I am awaiting for you to provide
evidence. Do you agree or disagree?
It is your. Yeah, I know. It is your claim. I am waiting for you to provide evidence for your claim.
Okay, Wikipedia, World Almanac. That's where I've gotten my figures from. They said about 250 million people in the world. Do you agree with that?
I'm still waiting. Please send a link. Let's put it this way. You're making this claim.
Well, I'm not making up the numbers. I got them from Wikipedia and World Almanac. They say 250 million people in the world.
At what time?
In Jesus' day. 0 AD, around that time period. Okay, my question to you is, how did 250 million, or whatever number you believe that they still had parents back in Jesus' day, right? Everybody in the world had to have parents.
Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, you agree they had parents, right?
I almost don't know how to answer that question.
It is that simple, right? I know it's that simple.
So go ahead.
It's that simple. Yet at some point, you're going to say that they turned backwards to a different kind of life form, common ancestry with apes, halfway erect, quarter-way erect. There had to be a time when males and females didn't exist, yet they had to reproduce themselves asexually as they were gaining their sexual organs. Yet you say somehow 250 million people go back to a common descent cell, which you won't be able to explain where that came from, I'm sure. But that aside, you say 250 million people in Jesus' day went backwards to something subhuman? Let me make the point first.
Your whole argument was just a complete non sequitur. It didn't follow. You're trying to make an argument based off of world population. But wait a second. What you just said.
Now, let me make the point first. I'm sorry. 8 people 4,400 years ago fits perfectly with 250 million people in Jesus' day to 1 billion in 1804 to 7.3 billion today.
I already pointed this out in our first debate.
That's a slam dunk. That proves not only is the human race young, but it also shows that evolution is absolutely impossible.
Everything that you just said is a non sequitur. Nothing follows from one another. But you know, the first thing is, I already pointed this out in our first debate. How many sons did Noah have?
3.
According to Scripture, 3. So there was only 4. There was only 3 reproducing couples. So I don't know why you keep saying 8.
There was 8 people that were saved during the flood. Noah, his wife, and their 3 children and their 3 wives.
Right, but there was only
8 people.
3
So you're right. There was
reproducing
only 3 couples.
Oh, good. You finally.
Well, it doesn't mention that Noah and his wife didn't have any more children. I don't know if that's a fact, but they could have had more children.
Okay, so then what we're going to do now is we are going to, again, you agree with the date then, you just admitted it right now. You agree with the date of the flood being 2348 BC.
I'd say about 4,400 years ago from the numbers of the ages of the people and how long ago.
Okay. So first of all, we could go, I would like to go back to this later, that is refuted by all known history.
What is?
The claim you just made. So as far as the dates go, we know those dates aren't correct. And again, that's based off of all known history. There are many civilizations.
There's an unsubstantiated statement.
There are many, well, I'm actually going to give you the evidence here in a second, but we'll go to that part later. But what you are then claiming is that you basically have this population that is starting with, again, 6 reproducing couple, or 6 people, 3 reproducing couples, and you're claiming that that is going to give us the population of the entire Earth that we see now.
Correct.
Basically, almost. Okay. What is your evidence for that claim?
The numbers, when you look at
what number?
The fact that today,
so
we have
okay,
hold on, you asked a question.
Yeah.
7.3 billion people in the world today. 250 million, or say 300 million. I'll use the 250 million because that's the number I've been using. If you go back from today to 2016 years ago or so, that's 97% less humans that we have in the world today. 97% in just 2016 years. Now, if there was 250 million people, you have to bottom out within a few thousand years in the BC. Now, 8 people, you might have seen that chart. They post it all the time that I showed on Twitter, where when you do the curve, it goes right back to 8 people fits perfectly.
But
you're saying, and you're going to say, well, how can how can they breed with each other? I imagine you're going there, but think about what you're saying. You're saying that these humans at some point are going to go back to a time where.
Okay, now you're switching topics.
No, it's the same topic.
No, it is not.
Same topic. You're saying that they go. How's it not? You're saying that they go back to a non-human ancestor.
We're going to stick with the population to start with. Okay, so basically, as you see here, here's a population growth calculator. What I've put in is the starting year is going to be 0. That would be 2348 BCE. The ending year I put at 4250, which would be today. It's not exact, but it's close enough. It's within a decade or two, right?
I'm sorry. Why do you have the year 4250?
How long ago in years was Noah's flood?
4,400 years ago.
Okay, so I'll put in 4,400. There you go. I'll give you, I'll make it as liberal as possible. Okay, there we go. What was the starting population?
8.
But it was actually 6 because we don't have any evidence.
No, I would stick with 8 because Noah could have had more children. It doesn't mention it, but it's possible that Noah had more children.
But it doesn't mention it. So if it doesn't mention it, we can't really put it in here.
But it doesn't say that Noah didn't have any more children. I'll check on that, but I don't believe it mentions that.
Okay. So then let's actually just get rid of part of this here. So let's go up to the time that you keep quoting, which is what day that we know the population was what, 250 million? How long ago was that? Yep.
In Jesus' days, say 2,000 years ago.
2,000 years ago. So okay, we'll bring this down to, it is going to be, there you go. So that's right. 2,000 years
From
now, right?
That's
From the flood date. So there I've divided in half. Starting population 6, population growth rate, basically a regular growth rate. Calculate. See, how many people are we going to have when we calculate starting 0, 0, starting population growth? Wow, that's a big number.
yes, which I naturally don't agree with. I don't think.
No, but you just made the claim that that's what the population should be, based off of.
So hold on now.
Let's do something even more interesting.
So you're saying
How long
16
ago-
trillion. Hold on.
It's not trillion. but-
Population in 2,400 years, you're saying would be 16 trillion. Wait.
It's a population growth calculator. So let's do this. How many years after the flood was Babel?
Hold on. I want to work on your number here now. This is
Well,
16.
this is just pure
what is
math.
that number? 16. What's 12?
Hundreds, thousands, millions, billions, trillions. Okay. So let's actually talk about
Billions.
Babel. So
Okay,
Babel
16.
occurred.
You're saying 16 trillion people in 240 years or 2,400 years. If that's the case, how is it that we had, say, 250 million, which is much greater than your start, and we've only gone, 2,000
Yeah,
in
according to
2,000
this
years,
issue.
and we only have
So-
7.3 billion.
How long after the flood was Babel, the Tower of Babel?
I'm not exactly sure how
It's
long.
about
I know
100
it's.
years. According to the scripture, according to Usher, it's about 100 years. So let's put in
Yeah,
100 years.
Do you understand how far off your 16 trillion number is?
Yeah, I
If you
know.
have 2,400. If you
Well,
have
so yours.
2,400, but you're saying
Look at
from
that.
in 2,000 years, starting with 250 million,
Mhm.
according to your numbers, it should be astronomically higher than 16 billion.
I
It's
know.
only
I'm just kind
2,000
of
years.
I'm using kind of a real thing here, right? So here we go. Oh, about 100
sound real.
years after 100 years after the flood, what is the population?
Yeah, after the flood. Relation in 100. I'm not sure what you're. where you're
Okay.
getting at.
I'll do it again. About 200 years after the flood. What's the population 200 years after the flood? Oh, it would be 65 people.
I disagree with that number
Why? This is pure math.
as well.
Okay.
In 200 years, well, let's say if there's 8 people, they could start having kids at 15. If they had, I could see in 200 years, I can see way more. There's no way, if you're only at 65 in 200 years, there's no way you're going to go to 16 trillion in 2,400 years
Oh,
like
okay.
you had there.
All right.
If there's
But-
8 people, if you think about it, somebody could be
Oh,
15, start having kids.
Fine, let's put in 8. It's still not going to be that much more. It's only going to be 86. But again, according to scripture, Usher, again, this biblical chronology that you keep saying that you accept, the Tower of Babel was only about 100 years after the flood. So that means there would only be 26 people. That's interesting.
I would look into that. I don't know. I certainly don't agree with the numbers you're showing, and because they don't add up.
Oh, so it's more incredulity. Well, let's
No,
look
it's not incredulity. It's they
let's
don't
look at
add
some
up.
actual. Let's
Come
look
on,
at some
it's
actual.
they don't add up.
Yeah, I know.
200 people in, or I'm sorry, if there was 8 people in 200 years, you would have, thousands, not 65. I don't know how you get that. And then your numbers, if it's 2,400 years, all of a sudden it's going to go to 16 trillion. when we started at 250 million and today we only have 7.3 billion. If your numbers were right, and we had, say, 250 million in 2,000 years, your numbers would be way more than the 16 trillions. Yet we only have 7.3 billion.
Why do you think that is, Joe?
Well, you mean you're not accounting for wars, diseases?
Oh, so there was a lot less war and disease right after the flood?
There was certainly a lot of wars throughout history.
Oh, okay. Then there should have been a lot less people, I guess, in that 100 years. So, if we go back to this, within 100 years after the flood, there shouldn't have been 26 people. Maybe there was still like, what, 12? I mean, 100 years after the flood. So, getting to that again,
Look,
this whole idea of the flood occurring.
The Duggars had 20, how many kids and counting? If it was a situation like that,
but
one person could have had 20.
We're talking before the time of modern medicine, when most people didn't live to be beyond the age of
that's according
mid-40s.
That's according to your.
No, this is according to history.
No, that's according to your bias. I've studied history. I've studied people's ages from back then. People have always lived. According to the Bible, the conditions were a lot different. That people lived longer. You're saying people lived shorter because of your belief of evolution, that things
because of real history.
Younger, we get bigger, better, and live longer. Yet the conditions of the earth were much better before the flood, where people actually lived a lot longer.
So looking at some real history here we have a real historical timeline of some ancient cultures. Here we have the Egyptian culture. Here we have the Sumer culture, the Sumerian. Here we have the Minoan culture, which is basically ancient Greece. Oh, look at that. There's the flood at about 2,348 BC. Wow, all of these cultures didn't seem to even recognize the flood was going on. Oh, the Indus culture as well. Indus being the area between India and Pakistan, modern day India and Pakistan. Chinese culture does start slightly after it. Here's another culture, basically the precursors to the Assyrian culture that are right at that area as well. But all of these cultures didn't seem to even recognize the flood.
That's another claim. That's what you're saying to me. You're making a claim here.
No, this is just history. This isn't a claim. This is known history.
Oh, it's history, but it's your dates are the claim. I know the Sumerians. They potato. They went to Mesopotamia, which we see mentioned in the Bible. We see Egypt mentioned in the Bible. There's plenty of time, 4,400 years ago, for the Sumerians to have started and populated from that time, and in Babylon and Egypt, 4,400 years ago. Now, these numbers here, I would like you to show me how, you know them for certain.
Besides carbon dating? Besides carbon dating and written records, especially with the Egyptians?
Written records. I would like to see the written records. The oldest records I've ever heard of were about 4,000 years old. We know the Bible, the first 5 books, the Torah, and maybe a couple others in the Bible were written about 3,500 years ago. And at most, the oldest written history is about 4,000. So that fits perfectly. Your carbon dating, they don't use carbon dating much because it's been known to be, it's probably the most accurate of all of the dating systems, but we know that it's still not foolproof. They've dated mollusks that were hundreds of years old that were alive.
Oh, thank you for parroting Ken Hovind, but I can actually.
But that's a fact. They've had many. Carbon dating is good, but it's, your numbers there are made up. I would like to see that proven. To me, that's just a claim. I'm not doubting that the Sumerians didn't exist, Babylonian. I'm saying that your time frame that you put there doesn't fit.
Another argument from incredulity.
No, that's your argument from incredulity. You're not showing me factually. You're making a statement and a claim that this happened during this time period. And I want you to show me. You're only saying carbon dating. I can, that's That's
Here you
not
go, here's-
proving. That's not proving anything. You're saying carbon dating, which could be inaccurate. You would agree with that, right?
You'd have to give a specific example that I could actually then look at. As far as the snails, that's an easy one to go over if you want to go over that. But here's something to your claim right here. Here we have oldest writing nearly deciphered. So this writing has been around for a while, and they're finally deciphering it. This writing goes back 5,000 years. It was written.
Okay, that's a statement. That's a statement. 5,000 years.
This
that's
is
a claim. No, that's a claim.
It is evidence, and I would like you to tell me why it's claim.
It's a claim because you're saying it's 5,000 years. Show me. Don't just say it. Show me how it's 5,000 years.
So basically, everything that I'm going to present to you, you're going to say is a claim, and you're going to say that there's bias.
Isn't it? That's what you're doing, and that's what you're saying, and that's exactly what you're doing.
But you haven't actually presented anything for all of us to look at yet. That's the problem.
Show me how it's 5,000 years. Show me clearly where everybody can see objectively, plainly.
And how would you like me to show you that?
Exactly.
No, that's why I'm asking you.
You can't.
Oh, so
somebody who wrote that article
to know how old anything is what you're now claiming.
Had to have figured it out somehow. How did they come up with the 5,000? Somebody came up with it. Did somebody question him? How do we know this?
So
all you said was 5,000 years ago, and people are just supposed to say, "Oh, okay, 5,000 years." I've seen that so many times. People say, "Look, Joe, this is 40,000. This is 40,000 years old." Explain that. I'll explain it by saying your dates are wrong. They're biased. They're subjective.
Everyone drink.
They're they're not as clear as you're saying that they are. You there?
I am. I'm just kind of waiting for you to, again, present evidence of the claim you have just made.
I'm waiting for you to present the claim of 5,000 years and proving it to me.
Well, then
it was disproven because you showed me something that read, "This is 5,000 years old," and saying, "Okay, Joe, prove it." Well, I'm saying to you, prove to me it's 5,000 years old.
But this is the evidence right here.
It's an article written by a man. 5,000-year-old writing. Prove that to me. Just prove it. Show it. Show it objectively. I can show you objectively how we determine, say, Moses wrote the Torah. I can show events in history and show people's ages, and we can, correlate them to what we see. But you're just showing 5,000-year-old writing, and I'm supposed to just say, "Oh, okay, you're right." No, I need more. I need more proof that what you're saying at 5,000, you're going to say carbon dating. It's been inaccurate in many ways. It's subjective. Whoever it was it Asimov who came up with 5,370 or 270 years as the half-life of carbon? I mean, that was an indeterminable statement. There's too much guesswork done in things like that. You don't know how much it had when it started, whether the decay rate stayed the same. Really, you have a guess about a guess, which makes the dates hopelessly flawed. Unless you can show me conclusively that this number, and it's not just this. I mean, I deal with people all the time, say, "Look, this is 40,000 years old. How's that fit in your flood?" And I mentioned to them that that's just a claim. That's a statement, but you can't show it to me objectively here and now. And until you can, it's just a claim.
So what would you consider then objective evidence?
Like I said to you, when we events in history that you can show, if you have carbon dating, if you can show, some event in history, like the Torah. I mean, they can date people's ages from when they lived, the time period that they lived, and we can know that the flood was 4,400 years ago. Jesus lived about 2,000 years ago. King David lived about 3,000 years ago. Because we can show this in history.
Independently verify. Yes, I know.
That's exactly independently verified.
So again,
and you can't do that right here.
Why can't I?
Because you're not. Why aren't you?
Okay, here you go. That's the thing. I can go through various scholarly articles and books to show you the actual real history. Again, this is real known history. Going back to this right here, this is history that you would basically have to be, pretty conspiratorial to basically deny that this is what we know about.
I just want you to show me. I'm not. Yes, it's not a conspiracy. I just want you to show me.
Which is right here. So here we have again that culture that we were just talking about, that oldest known writing from 5,000 years ago. So this is an older paper, so it doesn't have some of the most recent stuff, but we do know that this culture extends all the way back to 2,300 BC, and it has a well-developed culture at that point. So basically 40 years after you claim the flood happened, this is basically a city-state culture going on in Mesopotamia. And this isn't the only one, because again, going back to this, there were many city-states in Mesopotamia at that time. So this is just one of many cultures, and they were using something.
Writings that age are very scarce back then. You know that. They didn't have the what we have today to record it, written on papyrus paper. So
no, it was not. Okay, really, Joe. So you're telling me that cuneiform is written on papyrus?
No, I'm saying other writings have been written on papyrus. I know cuneiform.
But I'm not talking about papyrus. Still, as you can see, everything right here, these are cuneiform.
Okay, so you are showing legitimate writing. I have no reason to doubt, but you showed the cuneiform of the, was that from the Sumerians had the cuneiform? I learned about that in school. My point is you're showing writing on a tone, evidence, but you can't prove the date. You can show me. The evidence is there. We can both look at the same evidence.
So basically, Joe is claiming that there's a worldwide conspiracy to make up these dates because it disagrees with his flood mythology.
No, I'm saying that there's a lot of times, like Charles Lyell, James.
You're getting off topic again, Joe. We have switched to something else. We can go back to that later if you want, because right now we're talking about.
I'm just making the point.
How old certain writings.
I'm just making the point that there was no evidence at all when Charles Lyell did his geologic column.
That is a claim that we can address later.
It's not a claim. It's there. He had no evidence. There was no dating methods back in the 1800s. It was an idea that he had.
No, we just went over this.
No, he made it up.
We just went over this, Joe. We actually just went over this, that there's a difference between absolute dating and relative dating.
You can't tell me for certain that you know how something old is past 5,000-6,000 years ago. You can tell me you think that. You can show me what you believe is evidence, but you can't objectively show it to me.
So you're basically saying that. So you were saying that all radioactive decay, as we know it, is a conspiracy.
I'm saying that people who have made those old ages did it to fit their framework of an atheistic belief system.
We're talking about science. This has nothing to do with atheism.
It has everything. You're talking about. Really, essentially, you're talking about atheism because it's where you start your view from. I start my view from.
No, it's not.
The scriptures.
I haven't brought up atheism.
Is the basis? No, you haven't. But you're trying to explain how everything happened naturalistically over millions of years, and trying to explain it in that framework.
No, I'm just presenting the evidence, Joe. We're discussing the evidence.
You presented a rock with. You presented cuneiform and looking at it. Yes, that is the evidence you showed, the cuneiform writing. But it didn't have a date on there, did it?
Oh, so you expect everything to have a date on it as
Well,
if there's a
it could have
copyright date in
something.
front of a book.
Something.
Okay.
Show me something.
So how do
Isn't
you
that
think they
fair?
actually, yeah, how do you think they actually come to these dates that everyone in the world agrees upon for the actual date
How
of
did
these writings right here,
how
this
did James Hutton?
proto-Elamite writing?
How
No,
did
wait,
James Hutton? I'm
I'm not
answering it.
talking,
This is an answer. How
I'm
did
not
James
talking
Hutton?
about James Hutton because that is totally off the topic that we're on
Let
right
me.
now.
I
Because right now
promise
we're talking
it's the
about,
same. It's the same
right
topic.
now we are actually talking about this cuneiform writing in a certain culture. This is the
I am
topic we're on
answering
right
it.
now,
My
which is
answer.
what you said. You do not accept these.
My
You do
answer
not
is
accept the
this. You
dates
said,
for
how
the
did they determine
writings
it?
right.
Yes, I do believe that they pulled it out of the air. I believe that a lot of these
So you are basically
numbers.
saying that there is a worldwide conspiracy to make up these dates.
No, I don't. Well, it's possible that some did it. Some might believe it, but
These are worldwide accepted dates.
how did James Hutton come up with 1 billion years in his uniformitarian belief system
When did he do that? Can you show me where
in the
James
early
Hutton
1800s?
No, I mean,
How about Charles Lyell? How did he come up with all these different periods being 100 million, 200 million, Jurassic, Cretaceous, and all these
I'm
periods? Was it a
that's
conspiracy or did he make it up?
a claim you just made about Hutton and Lyell. So please present me when they actually gave those dates.
I'm making the point that
You're making it up.
I can show the dates were pulled out of thin air.
But you haven't shown the source for the dates that you just claim exist that Hutton and Lyell made up. I'm waiting for you to present when Hutton and Lyell said those specific dates for those specific things.
I mean, it's kind of well known when you see the
It's well known.
geologic
You'll be able to
column
look it up just
that
like I
they
did.
said even you were saying they're all different age layers all in the geologic column, right?
So do you want to go back to absolute versus relative dating?
I mean, you can try to explain how you're certain, but you're really not. You can explain it, but you're really not certain. You can't show me objectively. You can tell me what your claim is. But
so one of the most interesting things that you said kind of in when I was presenting the difference between relative and absolute dating is you said that you don't agree with the law of superposition. Why is that?
I just believe that if there was a flood, you're going to see different layers in different ways around the world. And the topography of the land could be, taken into account for the layers that are there. But I would say that we see what would be consistent with a flood in all the layers.
Why do you disagree with the law of superposition?
Well,
I mean, this is a physical law. The rocks on the bottom are older. The rocks on the top of a geological column are younger. Why do you disagree with that?
because it's subjectively based. It's
How so?
you can't show it. You can't.
So now you're disagreeing with gravity, essentially.
No, I'm disagreeing with your take on the evidence that we see. We all see the same evidence. It's not that. It's where you start your evidence from. If you start from a naturalistic position, it has to happen over millions and billions of years.
So
if
these rock layers formed by magic?
Atheism falls apart if everything happens.
I'm not talking about atheism again, Joe.
It all falls apart when you...
I'm talking about the law of superposition right now. Please try to stay on topic.
The law of superposition, I believe when the flood happened, the layers formed rapidly.
On top of one another?
On top of each other, just like geological sorting.
You agree with the law of superposition?
I just don't agree with your time frame.
I never did a time frame. I just said that the rocks on the bottom were older and the rocks on the top were younger relative because of their position.
How much older? What are you saying? How much?
There's no age. Again,
so
that's what the law of superposition says, is that there is no age. We don't need to give an age. What the law of superposition says, no, we don't need to.
Okay, well, tell me over a period of how long, though, then.
We don't need to give that either. I mean, we haven't even started to discuss that yet. The only thing that the law of superposition says is that when you see a stratigraphical column like this one, the ones on the bottom, they are older than the ones on top. That's all.
I mean, that's a claim. That's a claim.
No, that's
don't know. How do you prove
the law
it?
of
Prove it to me. How do you prove it?
Okay, gravity.
How do you prove it didn't all happen at once? Is what I'm saying.
No, now that's your claim. So again, the way that you prove the law of superposition is gravity. Gravity! Desert file.
Well, we can both look at the same evidence, and I know gravity and time and pressure forces these mountains, the tectonic plates colliding.
Wow, we're totally off topic again.
Forms the mountains. Well, what we were talking about was how ages were just concocted.
No, I wasn't talking about that. I was focused on the law of superposition. I'm still trying to get you to tell me why the layers on the bottom here would be younger than the layers on top.
I'm saying that they'd be about the same time, younger, because they were there first, and they're not much younger if it all happened over.
Wait a second, the layers on the bottom are younger?
They would be the first ones that were laid there. If there was a flood, the ones at the bottom would be there first, I would imagine.
So they're younger. So the ones on the bottom are younger.
I would imagine so. Not much. I mean, if the flood happened quickly.
So the layers on the bottom
how are you
would
going
be
to prove
younger,
to
and
me?
the ones on top would be older.
How are you going to prove to me that they're not? How are you going to prove to me that they're not?
You do realize what you just said, Joe, right?
Yes, of course.
You're saying that the layers on the bottom are younger than the layers on top.
Well,
you just said that like 2 times in a row when I questioned
the flood happened and everything settled, the ones on the bottom got there first.
So they would be younger.
The first ones, so they would be younger in that sense. Now I'm asking you.
God.
I'm asking you to prove to me how you know how you know that they're older.
Yeah, I agree.
Gravity. You said gravity.
Schwain's,
that doesn't explain. I mean, that's one word.
He doesn't
it's not
seem
an
to understand
explanation.
gravity at all. Are you reading the Twitter feed by any chance?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh boy.
So you can't explain how you.
I already did. It's called gravity.
You said gravity. How's that an explanation? That's one word. How can you tell me they're older and it didn't happen at once?
Okay. I'll explain gravity to you, Joe. Here's how we know that the layers on bottom are older.
Gravity.
Okay, but you don't seem to, because you kept saying that the layers on the bottom are younger. So here is how gravity works, Joe.
Not much younger. It all happened at once.
Okay. So here's how it works, Joe. Let's say that I have some fairy dust, some glitter. I'm gonna.
We're talking real examples here.
Yeah, we are talking real examples. I'm talking about glitter. I'm gonna call it fairy dust just so that we have kind of a commonality between what we're talking about here. Let's say that I have this purple fairy dust, and I throw it up in the air, and it settles down, and then a few seconds later, I have this pink fairy dust, and I throw it in the air, and it settles down. And I have this red fairy dust, and I throw it up in the air, and it settles down. And then a few seconds later, I throw this blue fairy dust in the air, and it settles down. Which layer of fairy dust is older out of the purple, the pink, the red, and the blue?
Well, naturally, in your example, doesn't fit with geologic sorting.
It doesn't matter. I'm just asking you.
Naturally, the last one would be the youngest.
The last one would be the youngest. Okay. Gravity.
Yes, I understand what you're saying, but you're building in a whole assumption in saying gravity and trying to say that it happened over long periods of time. You won't even give a time period that you're saying this happened.
You don't need to, because that's what the law of superposition says. You don't need to give a time period. You just know that the ones on the bottom were laid down first, so they are older, and the ones on top were laid down last, so they are the youngest. Just like the example I gave you with the fairy dust, if we throw in order of a time that you're throwing them up in the air, you throw the purple ones up first, you throw the pink ones up next, you throw the red ones up, and then you throw the blue ones up. The ones that hit the ground first are going to be the purple ones, therefore they're the oldest layer. It's all about gravity.
When you talk about geology, though, you're speaking about the weight, the density of what would settle to the bottom.
I already explained that as well.
Yeah, I mean, you explained it, but
I can actually give you a physical representation of it if you want. I can go outside and dig up a handful of dirt from my garden. I can put it in a water bottle. I can shake it up. And according to your flood hypothesis, that's why I started with this. According to your flood hypothesis, all the big stuff should be on the bottom. Then it'll be slightly smaller stuff, and there'll be slightly smaller stuff. So you go basically from boulders to cobble to gravel to sand to some silt, and then to the finest stuff on the very top. That is according to your flood hypothesis. But we don't see that in the geological column.
Well, I mean, I don't think that we would see anything always the same in the flood hypothesis. You have different topographies, different different things that are in the ground that could all factor in to, that wouldn't always be the same exact way. I mean, the fact is we do find billions of marine fossils. To me, this makes perfect sense that you would find these marine fossils in these layers, because there was a giant flood with all the, you would assume that the ones that went to the ground, the clams and that kind of stuff, the corals, that they would be one of the first ones that you would see naturally.
Okay,
humans,
so why
you
do
probably
we
wouldn't
find
many humans,
why
because
do we
humans
find
are smarter.
clams in modern layers as well then? What are those clams like?
You would find them anywhere.
Layers?
You could find them anywhere.
Now you're refuting
Why wouldn't they be all throughout the layers? That makes my point that they would be throughout all the layers, but you would find most of them in the lower layers, just like you would expect. The bigger animals, humans, you wouldn't find as much because they're smarter. They would know, they wouldn't get stuck in the, have the sand come on top of them. They would probably fight the flood.
Oh, let me guess. They're going to take a bunch of boats.
No, but they're not going to be.
So
they're going to be fighting until the last. Whereas a clam will just be covered, and the corals and the shellfish will just be covered, pretty much immediately.
According to what you just said, all the clams should be on the bottom. Then they shouldn't be at the top.
No, they could be anywhere. They find
because
clams.
the clams fought their way to the top of the humans.
How did clams get to the top of Mount Everest?
Plate tectonics. So getting back to your example. How do they find leaves? One more question. How do they find leaves in the Antarctica? Because climates change.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And we know how we actually know this. You actually want me to give you some evidence, because I can give you evidence for that as well. But here's the thing about Antarctica. Antarctica during the time of the dinosaurs didn't have any ice on it. It was basically kind of like the climate of right around Georgia. It didn't really have harsh winters. And that's why you do find layers of sediments that contain fossils of both dinosaurs and plants that are semi-tropical. And that is matched with, again, this is that consilience I was talking about before. Remember when we talked about consilience at the very beginning, when I introduced you the idea that you can take one group of evidence that one field of science studies, and guess what? It matches another group of evidence that's completely different evidence from a different field of science. Well, this is the thing about plate tectonics. The way that plate tectonics works is that when you're actually looking at continents, when you have certain lava flows, which we can date again, that consilience, we can date these lava flows using radiometric dating. When those lava flows first come to the surface and the magma cools into igneous rock on the surface, or even if it cools underneath the ground, once it cools and becomes solidified, the grains within inside of that rock that had some iron in it will align when they cool
to point, of course, north and south. They'll basically align upon the magnetic poles. And the way that we know that continents have shifted and changed positions over time is the alignment of those magnetic grains. And that is one piece of evidence. And then, of course, we have the fact that these igneous rocks, when they solidify from magma, then you have the radioactive decay cycle that starts, and you have the buildup of daughter to parent elements, so we can actually date the layers. And of course, you know, if we're looking at something as simple as the Earth itself, you know, we do have these mid-oceanic ridges, which do have that change. And if you would like, I can present you with some of that evidence right now.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of evidence that I look at, and I see
But you
something
haven't
totally
presented
different.
any.
Well, yes, I have, and you haven't either. You've just
What,
said,
I keep giving you evidence? So
you've
now I'm
just
going to
said
give you evidence of what I...
You've just said all you've said was claims. You were saying about 5,000. You said, how do you explain that? I said, prove it. You haven't proven it. You've said, you've shown what people have said, but you can't prove objectively that 5,000 year number that you showed that the Sumer in Sumer. You said that was right through the flood. You said, you know, is there a conspiracy on these numbers? And I'm showing you how every number that you have is made up, starting from Hutton, Lyell, even Charles Darwin built on Charlie Lyell and said that, you know, evolution had to have been millions of years for life to have evolved, because without millions of years, evolution looks damn silly. And my point is that these numbers were concocted. Even the half-life of carbon, 5,370 years. That assumes so much built into that. Yet how many times do people say, oh, this carbon dating proves it's this old? If carbon dating is so accurate, why in textbooks do they only say it's accurate up to 60,000 years when they used to say it was accurate for millions of years? If you take the half-life and you keep doing it a certain amount of times, you're going to get way more than 60,000. But it had to be reduced. My point is, everything you say about the radioactive, or that dating method that they have, is all, it's concocted. There's no way you can prove to me objectively that these numbers are, as you said. It's just a claim. As much as you want to think that you have science on your side, I think the science for the flood is much greater. And you still haven't addressed the human population. Your numbers were way off on the human population, and you still don't explain how humanity went backwards to a point where, you know, you didn't even have parents, according to the first life.
You're doing a great Gish Gallop here. I have to commend you. This is a perfect example of a Gish Gallop. So sticking on topic, since, you know, we're trying to stick on one topic at a time and you keep popping all over the place, so I'll bring you back. Here is an example of what I was just talking about. Okay, you have magnetic reversals that we can actually trace on the mid-Atlantic ridges. And the nice thing about the mid-Atlantic ridges is this is that consilience again of evidence from various fields of science. First of all, what you will notice here on your left side is we do have the flipping, the reversal of magnetic reversals shown in these dark and light bands. This is a fact. It's a fact because we can actually dig up these sediments, these igneous rocks along the spreading zone, what is called a divergent zone of two plates spreading apart. And you can see that one side mirrors the other, which is exactly what we'd expect from a spreading zone. This can also give us how long this actually takes to occur, because we can actually observe it happening in real time. We can extrapolate how far that happens in the future. And guess what? When you extrapolate the actual observable evidence of how fast C4 spreading occurs, it matches the radiometric dating of these igneous rock samples. The other thing that is also added up
before you get to your incredulity. The other thing that is also added up here is the fact that you have sediments that we know are laid down on the ocean floor in a known rate. It's basically called pelagic snow. Pelagic snow is basically all of these very small planktonic microorganisms that fall gravity, that fall down through the ocean layers, and they build up at a known rate in certain areas of the ocean. So basically you have these three independent lines of evidence that are all consilient with one another. They all match one another, even though they're using different evidence. And again, you can see here, this is near Iceland. So Reykjanes Ridge in Iceland, the dark bands are normal polarity, the light bands are reverse polarity, and then calculating the rate of seafloor spreading from the ocean sediment and distance from the spreading center, we can see that it's a constant rate. It's linear. So we actually do have and this is in millions of years, we do actually know that a certain distance from this spreading area, okay, and here it's in kilometers. You might not know how to use those, but we have kilometers, and over here we have how old it is based off of just the known spreading rate. Again, uniformitarianism.
Very subjective, very...
It's all actually observable.
No, it's not. I think you're trying to present a case that you say agrees with each other, but really it's very subjective. Just like the age thing, it's not like you can show millions of years by what you're showing. There's just too many variables.
It's another argument from incredulity.
Well, you're not making I think you're leaping to, oh, it took millions of years as a knee-jerk reaction to the naturalistic view that you have. Because you can't, it's almost like you have a house of cards that you're trying to build here. And I think for you to jump to those rates being millions of years is the same thing as Charles Lyell saying they're the dates are millions, hundreds of millions of years. I mean, it's a jump based on your ideology. Even if you can show the rates, it doesn't mean they were always the same like that. You don't know what it started with. I mean, there's questions that it's like you make a guess about a guess, and then you get another branch to say, oh yeah, this is this.
But I just gave you three lines of evidence that all match. I just gave you 3 lines of evidence that all match. First of all, it's right on the chart here. It's on the right-hand side. You'll notice that right here it says that the known rate of sea floor spreading at this area in the Mid-Atlantic Ridge is 2 centimeters per year. This has been observed over decades now. It is 2 centimeters per year. It hasn't changed over the time that we've actually observed it.
Not since we observed it, but it could have been different in the past.
That's the first. That's the first line of evidence. Okay.
Assuming millions of years.
No, it's not. This is just what we observe right now. 2 centimeters per year every time that we go down there and observe it, and they've been doing this for decades. It hasn't changed. That's a known fact. It's undeniable. Okay, so that's the first thing. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to then look at the radioactive dates of these igneous rocks. It matches the known seafloor spreading rates. Okay, that's what you're seeing actually here.
That's assuming millions of years, correct?
No, it's not assuming millions of years.
You have to assume what it is.
No,
what it
is looking at the known radioactive decay rates. The known radioactive decay rates, which you see along here in these numbers.
Which you get just a short picture of. You don't say what it started with. You don't even know if the decay rates stayed the same.
You're off topic, Joe.
No, it's...
So then the next thing we see is we see the sedimentary buildup. Now, the interesting thing about what you're actually seeing here is that what you're seeing here matches volcanoes on land. So that is kind of the most interesting thing about this seafloor spreading is that, yes, you do have the seafloor spreading, which you're seeing on the screen right up here, which I just went off of. But then what I'll do, and this is extremely easy to find. I mean, you can find it. Hey, you've got a computer right in front of you. But you have a seafloor spreading. I'll just type this in so you can see this.
magnetic
seafloor
reversals,
spreading.
and volcanoes. And what will happen is that when you actually start to look at seafloor spreading, they match known magnetic reversals that happen on layers of volcanoes as well. So it's not just like you have the seafloor spreading and there's nothing to match it with. You can actually get those exact same magnetic reversals found in volcanoes. They're happening at the same time. They're radiometrically dated. And we do know that certain volcanoes, especially ones around subduction zones, will periodically erupt, and they'll erupt on a pretty nice periodic basis. So it is something that's pretty well known as well. So again, what we've just seen here is, again, there's all this different evidence. There's the current rate of spreading. There's the magnetic reversals that mirror each other on both sides. Those magnetic reversals also mirror each other when you look at volcanic eruptions, basically the layers in the volcanoes. You have the buildup of sediment again, and you have the radiometric dating of both those things matching. So this is that consilience again. This is basically, you have evidence which is independently gathered. It's different evidence. It's not the same, but it all matches, which should not be possible if this is actually not the real dates.
I guess what you're not understanding, what you're doing is you're just trying to make the evidence fit.
No, I'm actually just showing you the
No,
evidence.
because you can't show, once again, you can't prove the radiometric dating that you're saying. You have nothing to match it to.
But what you are claiming is that it's a worldwide conspiracy.
I'm claiming that in the past, we have clear examples of made-up numbers that were pulled out of thin air, and this is a fact.
That's your claim, which you have not presented any evidence for.
I've showed you.
Where?
I've shown you Lyle with his geologic column.
That's what you claimed. Yes,
shows that there are millions of years. Isn't that correct? That the Jurassic, I mean, what are all the time periods they have if they didn't have matched that with the geologic column?
What?
They match the geologic column, saying that this is this old. They say if you find it in this layer, it's this old. You know, the rocks date the fossils date the rocks. You know,
you've already said that, and I've already shown.
I'm showing you again.
The law of superposition and relative dating versus absolute dating. So we've kind of beaten this dead horse for a while, and Alfred Shaw on Twitter actually asks something that I have brought up with you before, which I would like to actually ask again. So basically, you have this this one arc with these 6 or 8 reproducing couples. You saw from the population calculator that it really doesn't make a difference of how many people you have.
I totally disagreed with your numbers on there. They were
I know
way off
you
base.
totally disagree
Way
with
off base.
numbers and math. I
and
understand.
I explained how that they totally didn't add up.
Going back to this, and then we can maybe get into fossils, although it is about 1 o'clock now. So what we can do is basically, humans have these diseases that we know about. Some of them are called sexually transmitted diseases. And basically, what you're claiming is basically all kinds of organisms only survived because they survived on the ark. So what that means is that either one or all of the individuals on the ark had basically every sexual transmitted disease that we know of.
No, I wouldn't say that. I think sexually transmitted diseases and other diseases evolved, to use the word the way it should be, from just interaction between people. That diseases that I'm sure that the bacteria and things had to be there, but these are things that started after the flood. They didn't have to have it then. It could have all happened after the flood. New diseases. I mean, when do diseases start? We see them start in history all the time. During a certain period, a certain disease will start. So if they started in times that we've seen, why would you think that everybody back then they all had to be there?
Okay, so kind of going back to the ark and species again, every single organism that's
that's represented in the fossil record had to be on the ark.
Every organism in the world, correct.
That we see in the fossil record.
Of course.
Okay. So where are they all?
Well, we see them today. I mean, if you
see dinosaurs today, like a brontosaurus and a triceratops running around.
Well, we do see their fossil remains.
Oh, but wait a second. No, every organism that exists in the fossil record should have been on the ark. Pairs of every.
I believe that. I believe that dinosaurs were on the ark. I believe that
every species that you find in the fossil record.
Every original prototype, every.
But it should be everything we found in the fossil record, right? Because the only reason that we find those organisms in the fossil record is those all should be kinds.
No, I remember you saying that at the last debate, and I wanted to correct you, so thank you for bringing that up. Not every species would be on the ark.
Why not?
Now, at the time of the flood, I'm sure there were many different species, just like there are today. But the Bible says that each kind, which would be the family, you would go to the original family member, the original prototype, if you will.
But wait a second.
Every representative.
Wait a second, though, Joe. Everything that was on the earth was supposed to be called aboard the ark to be saved. Every different species.
Every species doesn't mean, like, for example, we have horses, zebras.
But
mules.
if we find those in the fossil record, then those should have all been brought on the ark in pairs.
No, not if they were the original family member from where the species came from. A lot of times when you have a species, you say it's a member of this family, or it's a member of this family, meaning
like humans are part.
It was an original, pure horse-like animal that God created. And God took that same horse-like animal and brought him on the ark.
So
now, not every.
Are you talking about like a scientific classification system of like kingdom, family, class, order, family, genus, species?
The taxonomic systems.
Okay, so you're saying that only in the taxonomic system, only families were brought aboard the ark?
Yes, the original kinds of each member, the representative of each individual kind. Not every kind of dog species would be on the ark.
Then why do we have all these fossils of all these different species of animals in the fossil record?
Because the same thing happened then that happens today. When God created, say, the original dog kind, I'm sure by the time Noah's Ark happened, there were many different kinds of species of dogs. There may have been wolves. It may have been wolves that started, and we have dogs. Or it may be two separate.
Well, that's the actual archaeological evidence we have that all domesticated dogs today came through.
I wouldn't argue
breeding
that.
of wolves.
I wouldn't argue with that. For the sake of argument, I would even say, okay, let's say that's
which happened around 8,000 years ago, which kind of goes way beyond your.
There's another claim. There's your claim again,
which I can give evidence for.
Well, you can't prove it. You can't prove it objectively and conclusively. You can say it, but you can't
because it's a worldwide right now.
Show everybody right now how you know that 8,000 years ago.
How we know that domestication occurred?
To where it's not a question in anybody's mind. I mean, just make it clear right here and now.
Okay, after I get back to the claim that we were just started with, I'll address that. Okay. So basically you're saying that a kind is what we call the taxonomic family.
Correct.
Okay.
The genus.
Okay. Oh, wait, now you just switched. Is it the genus or the family?
Well, they are very closely related. I would say the family.
Okay, so I'm just making sure. So you were saying that what went on the ark was basically some kind of organism that was the taxonomic family, and it doesn't matter what animal we're looking at, it was the family that went on the ark, whatever the organism looked like. What would that organism look like?
For, say, a dog or horse?
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. For a modern species that we have today, and this is something that I asked previously as well. So basically, we have, like, what you're basically claiming is this type of super evolution where you have this one kind that now you're saying is a taxonomic family. This one kind was what went aboard the Ark. So this one kind goes aboard the Ark. When it comes off, it rapidly evolves into every known species that came from that taxonomic family. That's what you just claimed. So, and basically in a rate of evolution that far exceeds anything that we ever observed anywhere, even in the fossil record. So you're saying that this taxonomic family splits into all these different species that we have today.
Correct.
Okay. So kind of going to, you know, a common taxonomic family that you keep talking about is, you know, you keep bringing up dogs. So what taxonomic family are dogs in?
Well, I would say that it's possible wolves, maybe sure wild dogs.
No, what taxonomic family do all dogs belong to?
You mean
because you just claimed it was the taxonomic family.
They are, I mean, they're animals.
Yeah, but you were claiming that it's a taxonomic family. So I'm
Correct.
asking, what taxonomic family do dogs belong to?
I would have to look that up, but we can.
Oh, I can do it for you. I just did it. So here we go. I'll show you what taxonomic family dogs belong to. Here we go. They belong to a family known as Carnivora. And guess what Carnivora includes? Oh, so what you're saying is that one pair of animals went aboard the Ark, and when they came off the Ark, they evolved into all known cats, all known bears, all known hyenas,
No,
all
of
known
course not.
jackals,
Of course
all
not.
known badgers. But that's what you
not.
just claimed.
No,
You
I
said
didn't.
that what?
No,
yes,
I didn't.
You said that what?
I
that's
claimed
why-
we were speaking
that's
of
why
dogs.
I'm asking you. No, you said it was a taxonomic family. So what you just said, what you just claimed, was that what went aboard the Ark are taxonomic families of organisms, and when they come off, they diversify into all known species that we have today. Well, here we go. Here's the taxonomic family that dogs belong to. It's carnivores. So basically, you're saying that when this one pair kind came off the Ark, the species that they've evolved in today are all known cat-type families, the Feliforma, all known ursas, the bears, all known hyenas, all
No.
known. But that's what you just claimed.
Let me correct. No, let me correct.
Oh, okay.
You.
So
I
back up
think
and
you
correct yourself, please.
I think you misunderstood or mischaracterizing what I said. What I
But
said
that's why
was
that's why I asked you numerous
Okay.
times, and you said it was the taxonomic family.
the family of dogs, the family of
Is Carnivora.
tigers, the family of bears, the family of
Oh, so you're not
every different.
So you are
the
not
original-
talking about a scientific classification. You're just talking about some classification that you've made up and you don't have evidence for.
No, I'm talking about a scientific classification that
Well, this scientific
dogs are-
classification
dogs
for
are-
dogs
dogs
is they
are.
belong to the family Carnivora.
Yep, and there's a lot of meat eaters. Right? That's what they mean.
It
They're
doesn't.
meat eaters.
That's
that's
the
a
Greek,
pretty
that's the
general-
Greek and Latin
That's a
roots.
pretty general.
No, that's the Greek and Latin roots
Right, but it's
for the
general.
name Carnivora.
It's
Right, but
general
but
for the different
taxonomic
kind of
family
meat
that they
eaters.
belong
there are.
to includes all cats, all bears, all hyenas, all jackals and dog type things, all civets, and all of the muscelids. Basically, are weasel and badger families.
Well, then,
So-
maybe it goes down to the genus, but obviously,
Oh, so you're
carnivore-
changing it to a genus now?
I'm like I said, they're very closely related. They're
Oh, so they are closely related. So all
I'm
of these
saying-
organisms that you see up here are closely related.
no, I'm saying that
Oh, they aren't now. Okay, why do they all look so similar?
I'm saying the genus and the family type are
Well, this
closely.
is
Them
the
words
scientific family.
themselves in the taxonomic term are closely related. They're individuals, certain characteristics that with the different underlying characteristics that make them the animal that they are. The original prototype would be a dog type. The original lion would be a lion type. The original horse would be a horse type, giraffe. Now, I'm not saying generally carnivores. I'm saying specifically the family of animals, a family of dogs, a family of giraffes, a family of lions. Each individual one would have an original prototype, not all coming from, one animal.
Okay, where's your evidence for that?
Well, I mean, what we see is obviously we see what I say every single day.
That's your claim, so I'm waiting for the evidence.
Well, you know what the bear kind is.
You do remember that when we agreed to this conversation, you said you'd be presenting scientific evidence to back up your claims. And as of this point, you have not given any citations for anything that you have said. You have not actually shown me any scientific papers. You have not cited any known scientists in the world. You've not done any of that. You just keep making up these claims over and over and over again in this very good fish gallop you've got going.
I've given plenty of evidence that you don't accept. You've made many claims that I don't accept.
I know you are, but what am I?
Is it true that we still see you need two of every kind to produce? Wouldn't it make sense that Noah brought two of every kind on the ark?
That's your claim, which I'm awaiting for evidence that you are going to present.
We still need two of every kind today, to a male and female of each kind, to produce offspring. It's the same pattern we see on Noah's Ark as we see today. Has that changed at all? No. Has the amount of dogs, the different kinds of dogs, changed? Many. In my lifetime, I've seen new breeds of dogs that have happened. In my lifetime. Does that mean that Noah's Ark had to have every kind of dog that we see in the world today? No. It goes back to the original. Same thing with like a horse type. Whether it's zebras, I don't know whether zebras or horses had their own, or whether they were two separate. But the fact is that only they can mate with each other, which fits perfectly with what the Bible says in the the flood account and the original account, that you would need a male and female of every kind. So we see the same exact pattern in the flood that we see today. And that is, each kind of animal produces their own kind. The family, I'm saying the original representative prototype of the various animals that we see today. Not speaking about carnivores, which is a general term. So, the pattern we see is exactly as we would expect.
Yes, I know that's what you're claiming. I'm just waiting again for the evidence.
I mean, the evidence is self-evident. We see it every single day. We still see the pattern that you only the bears stay bears and you need male and female.
That's what you're claiming. I'm waiting for the evidence. And again, I keep, I just keep doing this over and over and over again, where I am actually showing you things that are observations that contradict what you're saying. And you keep saying that you're incredulous to it, which I understand, you have to. But you are constantly saying that, no, I don't accept that. It doesn't, it's not something that I see today. All these things, going back to your horse kind, the one thing that we do have is horses belong to a certain group of animals known as perissodactyls, which means they have odd numbers of toes. And we have a pretty good representation of how perissodactyls fit into. So, fit into a family tree of many different species. So here you see perissodactyls right here. That includes tapirs, rhinos, and the equus, basically the horse family. Now, again, this is what we find in the fossil record. It matches the genetic evidence. So those are two pieces of evidence that are drawn from totally different lines, yet they match one another. So, and on this, we can also look at going back to your carnivore that you didn't kind of stopped talking about there once you
were shown that it disagrees with what you're saying, the carnivora. But again, here you have your perissodactyls. You have tapirs, you have rhinos, and you have equus. So all of these, again, match both in the fossil record and in genetics, because these are the three living clades groups of these species that are around. As you can see, they don't have the little cross next to them, so they're still alive. So we can test their genetics as well as look at the fossil record to find that they're related to one another.
Well, you also have to keep in mind that taxonomy is very subjective of how they group animals. That's why, taxonomists rarely agree with each other on many ways to classify these animals.
But they agree with each other on enough to where we can actually build these phylogenies.
I disagree.
And yes, I know you're incredulous. You've already explained that you're incredulous of all the evidence that's presented to you. But again, I still have to ask.
It's not really evidence.
Yes, it is, because it's actual direct observations. I still have to ask, why is it that when we get the genetic information, which we get from these lines of animals, these clades, why is it that when we get the genetic information, it matches the fossil record, and it also matches the current morphology, that they're more similar to each other in their anatomy than they are to any other animals? Why do all three of those things match? Why do the genetics match the fossils, match the current morphology? How is that possible without evolution? How do you explain all those matching things if not for evolution?
Well, as far as morphology, things only change a certain.
No, I'm talking about
amount.
talking about the anatomy of these groups. I'm not talking about the change. I'm talking about how
the anatomy of these groups, the genetics.
Here, if you look at the horses, the tapirs, and the rhinos, their current anatomy is more similar to one another than it is to any other living organism. Why is that? And why does that match the genetics in the fossils?
Because you can always find two things and say, oh, look how close they are. Looking at them, looking at their genetics. But
no, I'm talking about anatomy, and why does it match the genetics in fossils?
Genetics are pretty clear.
Our chemical signatures. So we build these family trees based off of genetics.
The DNA is written and specifically tell you what kind of animal it is.
So why do these three organisms have genetics that are more similar to each other than any other animal? And why is their anatomy more similar to each other?
Sure, you could group any because you can group anyone.
Also, record. No, I'm not talking about anyone. I'm talking again. This is facts.
Specifically these. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
They may be closer.
Talking about rhinos, tapirs, and equus. It is
horses and rhinos. You're saying horses and rhinos are
and tapirs
related. I think that's a stretch. I don't think you can show.
I am asking you again, why, when we look at their genetic information, is it more similar to one another than it is to any other animal that exists? Why, when we look at their anatomy, is it also more similar to each other than anything else that exists? And why, when we look at the fossil record, are these three organisms more similar to one another when we build a phylogeny than any other animal that exists?
Why do those reason? Okay, I'm answering. The same exact reason that apes and humans' DNA may be more similar than in any other.
Yeah, I brought this up in our last debate.
Just because you can put them together and say, oh, well, they're more similar than they're related, that's where you make the stretch. Yes, they're similar. Are they related?
All three of these
not necessarily. That's the jump that you make.
Lines of evidence. No, this has nothing to do with subjectivity, because this is
subjective.
Because this is totally objective. Because this is totally objective.
Because humans and apes have similar DNA, you say they're related.
No, we brought this up in our last debate. I know we talked about this at the end. Again, if you look at the DNA of a human and a chimp, and then you look at the DNA of every other life in the world, humans and chimps, the DNA is more similar than any other life in the world. Then if you look at the way that humans and chimps look compared to one another, compared to any other life in the world, humans and chimps look more like one another than any other life in the world.
No, that's not objective. No, that is a subjective bias that you have.
It is not at all, because I bet, I would bet you that you cannot tell me any other life in the world that looks more like a human than a chimp. Go ahead, try.
So what? I mean, what difference does that matter?
Because
you can find any two
objective evidence.
No, if you have a list of all the animals, everything.
Yes,
I'm sure you can keep doing this and say, well, look, these two are closer, and these two are close here, and these two are close here, and then you're jumping to a conclusion.
No, I'm just looking at the observable evidence.
It's not observable evidence. It's your conclusion based upon the evidence. The fact is...
Yes, it is my conclusion based upon the evidence. You're right.
Well, it's a jump, let's just say.
No, it's not at all, because you have not been able
It's a
to show
total
me.
jump.
Because
Look at apes and humans. What is similar about apes and humans? Nothing. There's not one thing you can tell me that is similar.
I just explained it to you, so that's why I'm going to stop you and ask you again.
I'm asking you. Tell me what's similar between apes and humans.
I'm doing it right now. I'm going to stop you and ask you again. If you look at a chimpanzee and a human,
they look different.
What?
They look different.
That's not my question.
What difference does it make how close they look? They're different.
What animal looks more like...
You want to say does it matter?
Why
does it matter? None.
What animal looks more like a human or a chimpanzee than they do to one another?
Well, you have a lot of different apes that look closer to each other than...
No, I'm talking about two specific examples, Joe. This is very easy. Stick with me here. So again, what I'm asking is, if you look at an ape, if you look at a chimpanzee and you look at a human, what other animal in the world, or even in the fossil record, what other animal in the world looks more like a chimp than a human?
Well, I mean, apes, I would say, look closer to each other than primates.
No, you're missing the point again. I will try it once more, Joe.
Please do.
We have a chimp and we have a human standing next to one another.
Okay.
If you compare a chimp to a human, what other animal in the world looks more like either a chimp or a human than they look like to each other?
I would say monkeys look more like chimps than they do humans. But okay. I still don't see your
monkeys
your
have
point
tails.
It's still a moot point, because you're speaking of something that is totally different in every single way.
But they look more like...
you can show animals
like one another than they look like to any other animal in the world.
Animals,
and also they have DNA that is more similar to one another than it is to any other animal in the world.
It's purely subjective.
That's
two animals.
Total,
you can say, oh, this animal looks closer to this one, so they're more related. That's the jump. Yes, they do look closer than others, but the jump is, oh, so they're related. Now, I asked you, what is similar about humans and apes? The DNA is not the same. Faces aren't the same. Voice isn't the same. Hair isn't the same. Arms aren't the same. What's the same? How can you make that stretch that they're related just because they are closer than others? And can't you really find two of almost any animal you name and say this one's closer to this one than any other?
I was just asking you. I was just asking you to do that, and apparently you can't give me any example besides. Again, you can't give me any. I just asked for it, and you said monkeys, but of course monkeys have tails, so that immediately rules out monkeys. But again, there is no other animal in the world that looks more like a human than a chimpanzee.
Even if I agree with it, it still doesn't prove your case.
Okay. Do you disagree with the fact that I am presenting that humans and chimpanzees look more like each other than any other animal in the world?
I'll even agree with that.
Good. So right away, we've got you agreeing that humans and chimpanzees look more like one another than they look like any other animal in the world. Okay.
I mean, I will study that a little more and check the different primates
You really need to study that? Have you never seen any other primates?
There's many different primates, and I'm saying if there's two that look closer, it's still in the primate family, but I would,
primates are a family now. Okay.
You know what I'm saying? It's
okay. So getting back
that group,
getting back to where we're going with this, which is I brought up in the last debate as well. Mm-hmm. If you compared human DNA to chimp DNA, is there any other animal in the world that has DNA that is more similar to humans and chimps than they are to one another?
Do you know what the percentage is?
Well, you've got a computer in front of you right now,
I
don't
can
you?
tell you, it's probably about 93. They used to say 98%. Even at 98%, you still can't make that jump to
But again, what I'm asking you has nothing
humanity.
to do with
But
that,
the more they've
what
studied,
I'm asking you has nothing to do with that. I am asking you, is there any other organism in the world that has DNA that is more similar to each other, to basically humans and chimpanzees? Do they have, is there any other animal in the world that does not have more similar DNA to either one of those than they have to each other?
I'll even agree with that.
Okay.
Still doesn't make your point, though.
So basically, you're saying that humans and chimps look more like one another than any other animal in the world, and human and chimps have DNA that is more similar to one another.
Which would make sense that they would have more similar DNA, since they look, I would imagine, and I'm just speaking off the top of my head, that it would be the same for other animals that you say look the same, would probably have similar kind of DNA. But it still doesn't. Doesn't make your point, though.
And look what happens when we put it together. I'm showing you the image right now. Look what happens when we put together the fact that animals that have more similar DNA also look more similar to one another. Oh, you get a phylogeny that matches the fossil record.
Phylogeny is a made-up word assuming evolution. It's a made-up word. It assumes evolution, so it's it's just a made-up word. It doesn't really have any meaning. It's made up by somebody who assumes evolution, because that's what phylogeny is. It's a study of the evolution of, organisms over time. So, you're showing similarities here, and then you're making your biased jump to, then they're related. And I asked you what was similar about apes and humans, and you can't name one thing. Yes, they are closer than any other, but no, they are not the same. You can't mate a human and a chimp, which makes them different kinds of animal. Different kinds. I don't believe humans are animals, as the taxonomic scale does. I believe humans should have their own separate category. That aside, they're different. You can't mate them. That makes them in a different family, because you can't mate them together. That's just the fact.
Are humans mammals?
Yes.
Oh, so we're mammals, but we're not animals.
Once again, you're like the carnivores. It's a very general term.
Really? Because I can name you traits.
Dolphins are mammals too. There's many mammals, but that doesn't mean that we're related. It means that God created a certain type that breastfeed. So, but you're saying, because the mammals are related, yet the only similarity you're showing is the fact that they nurse. And like I said, taxonomy is very subjective. You keep
claiming, yes. I know you keep claiming that.
That's a fact. You cannot get two scientists that'll agree
any evidence for,
because of how the many different ways that you could separate and distinguish animals together, like mammals, carnivores. They're not all going to be the same. They're going to go outside of different categories, but you can,
What is a platypus?
Platypus, I would say it has to be its own kind, its own type. I don't see anything. It looks like it has just about every kind of animal inside it.
But it nurses its young.
So it's certainly a mammal.
Oh, so it is a mammal now.
It has to be if it nurses its young.
Okay.
Isn't that the definition of a mammal?
No, that's why I'm asking you. So a platypus is a mammal that lays an egg.
Okay. So it's a mammal. They're sexual reproducers, as far as I know. So you need male and female platypuses. But my point is that you make the jump that the fact is you cannot mate humans and apes. Now, you can say that they're similar. I agree with that. They look close to the same. I agree with that. But it's that stretch that you make believing in evolution that you tie them together. And that's what I have the problem with. Because I think that it's just a biased decision, a biased choice that you have. I mean, there's nothing similar. Let me say, there's nothing the same with apes and humans. And every single feature that we see between apes and humans is spelled out in their DNA. That's the reason they started out at 98% saying similar to apes. And now they're down to like 93, 94%. They were wrong. Was it a conspiracy? I don't know. I don't think so. Certainly they were wrong to say 98%, and now they're down to 93% similar. The more they study, the more differences they see. That's just a fact. You can make your jump and say, oh, well, they're related because they are closer than any other. But it's still a jump that you're making.
Okay, Joe, do you want to present any other topics? Because it is kind of getting late.
Yes, it is getting kind of late. Well, I mean, there's quite a few things that I would want to bring up, but I don't think anything would be, you know, quickly ended, as we've shown that we can't really end things too fast here. Let me think. You know, I mean, we didn't talk at all about the ark and the requirements and the size of it and how all the animals fit. But I think that's just a little too involved right now. I guess if I can just give maybe a closing statement, unless you have something that you would like to bring up.
No, go right ahead.
Okay. Well, a second here. Okay. Well, I believe the Bible naturally says 4,400 years ago, because of the sinfulness of man gone wild, God destroyed this world. That would have been way different than what we see today. This means that there's a lot of conditions that happened before the flood that you would have to keep in context. If the flood is true, then the context of the greater context of where the flood occurs is true. And that is within scriptures. Many believe Noah's Ark has been found. I've seen some pretty conclusive things, but nothing, or pretty compelling things, I should say, but nothing conclusive. Many have said Christians believe these things for theological reasons. You believe it because the Bible says so. I mean, that's nonsense. It's never because the Bible says this and we're told to believe it blindly. But we're always told to check out these things to see if what they say is true or not. Paul commended the Bereans for checking to see what he said was true. He never said, just believe me. Well, the same God who started the universe started the flood. If there's a God, science can't deny him. If there's a flood, the world can't deny it. The reason, the things I presented here today show that not only can we believe what Noah's Ark and that story has, but on all matters of faith and practice, we can believe the Bible. If the scriptures can be wrong on testable things like geography, why should it be trusted on other matters like the nature of God? Scriptures say to, in your heart, honor Christ as Lord and always be ready to make a defense And I think that there's a good defense, good reason, as I presented here, to believe that the flood was a real event in history. We can look over everything. As I said, the world population, which he didn't answer how it turned back from 250 million people. Polystrate trees that go right through the strata, which some of them are upside down, some of them are diagonal, some of them are in coal, which shows that his subsiding tree couldn't have happened, like you said. Worldwide oceans. We see huge oceans. We see giant trenches, like the Mariana Trench, that you could fit the Himalayas in, and there would still be a mile. Said that if you level out everything, that the water would be 7,500 feet above the earth if you leveled out everything. Now, there's plenty of water out there. It says the mountains rose up and the valleys sank down. This means that there were high mountains, high hills, but when these tectonic plates collided, they formed the mountains that we have. Every earthquake, well, maybe not every, but most earthquakes and volcanoes we see right along this mid-ocean ridge that we see. These are the scars. The mid-ocean ridge is something like 40,000 miles long. The Earth's circumference is only 24,000 miles. So this ridge is longer than even the oceans. These are the scars that we see. We see fault lines across the whole world. That's evidence. We see marine life everywhere, which is evidence. I think once you put the case together, it's very compelling that what happened in Noah's day really happened. And that means it's the greater context that God destroyed this world because of man's sin, and that God will do it again. So I urge you to study some of the things I said, study some of the things my opponent said, and, judge for yourself. But I would urge you to do it with an open mind. Don't say, oh, it's because the Bible, and therefore it's a children's story. But look at the evidence of what we see, and you'll see that it fits perfectly. Thank you for your time. I appreciate my opponent's zeal and enthusiasm and knowledge that he has. And I look forward to debating again. I think debate is good. It's good to hear other people's opinions, and the truth will win out. And I intend to keep learning more each day and presenting this truth. And I thank you for your time.
All right, Joe, and I think I'll just leave it at that myself. So one thing to quickly go over again, I know that I've said this both on Twitter and other places, is that I started out as a comparative religions major, so I've actually studied not just the history of Christianity, but of most major religions, both in history and currently. So I understand those topics pretty well, which is why I always bring up the source of creationism, basically the history behind it, and why young Earth creationism basically is something that didn't start until the mid-1900s. And just kind of leave it with that.
It's always been around. It's always been around, creationism.
And I'm just going to leave it with that, because that's kind of the known history on that point. And I think that's kind of the point here, is that we actually have to look at the history behind all these concepts, because that's when we get a very good understanding of them. When we actually see the history has led to certain ideas, and we see the history behind the buildup of certain ideas to where they are now and how they've changed over time, it really tells us a lot more about what we can understand about the world around us and why certain people have certain views. Have a good night. Thank you.
You too. Thank you.
And since Joe left, thank you everyone for coming and participating on Twitter. Sorry that I couldn't actually get the chat room working here. I'm gonna have to figure that out myself. Just didn't want to distract everyone by trying to get that running while we were actually engaging one another. So as far as this goes, everyone knows that this will be archived on YouTube for everyone to watch if they'd like to watch it repeatedly. I'm not even sure how long this lasted. And please keep up the comments on Twitter. Please comment on the video on YouTube here. And if you have any other suggestions for some creationism advocates that you'd like me to talk to, please send them my way. I will engage with anyone, as everyone knows, specifically on this topic. I'm kind of not interested in some other topics at this point. I might get into those later, but this is kind of the main one that I have the greatest amount of interest in, purely because it is something that I've kind of devoted as a science teacher my life to. So I think the last thing to say about this, because I do know this from some people on Twitter, is there are theists out there that accept science, and I'm sure we all know that. That this has nothing to do with atheism, of course. This is basically, and this is why I keep trying to explain to Joe the history of young Earth creationism and how recent it is. So basically, the number of theists out there that accept science, of course, are pretty large. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these. This is from Pew, so the Pew Research Center, some of the polls that it does, and you will notice here that even though we are a Christian quote-unquote nation, this is the number of people who actually accept that humans have evolved over time. Of course, this is one of the lowest in the civilized worlds, and that's explained in other ways. But basically, our acceptance or non-acceptance of certain fields of science do not necessarily correlate with one's religiosity. There are plenty of people on Twitter I've talked to who are Christians, who are very religious, and they accept science. So this, this is a Gallup poll that's been going on, as you can see, for over 30 years now, and it is showing the same thing, that you basically have some theists who are basically what you would consider to be theistic evolutionists, who, or maybe even intelligent design theorists, who accept the scientific evidence behind evolution. They accept that humans have evolved over time. Even if God is part of that process, they accept that it's happened over billions of years and that all life is interrelated. So it's not true to say that all Christians are this way or all theists are this way, when we actually see that all over the world it's not. And I think that's kind of just what to leave it off, what I'm going to leave it with at this point is just kind of pointing that out. We do get many people who just don't accept any science, and I think those are the ones that we really need to be most concerned about and actually engage the most and kind of call them on what they're doing as what it is, which is promoting anti-science and pseudoscience, which I think in general just hurts humanity. So I'd like to say thank you again for joining in for however long we were on the air, since we didn't get going right at 10. Have a good night. The Scientia Perceptum signing off.